Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. G'day everybody. It is Saturday, November 30th. Recording you a little intro here before we get to the show. Happy Thanksgiving to all my American listeners. Just went by this past Saturday, a couple days ago. Hope you all had an enjoyable holiday. Yeah, this show here is a little bit of a monster. You would have seen the download size if you downloaded this, or the time counter. It's well over 3 hours. And that's after some fairly significant editing and processing. This presentation is a deconstruction of a piece of propaganda put out by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation on television called The Fifth Estate. At one time, when my friend Trish Wood was a host of this very same show, The Fifth Estate was the kind of, public broadcasting journalism that held power to account and was there to inform the people about what's really going on with a contentious issue in society. They are now no longer that. And after saying nothing about the Coutts situation for nearly 3 years, 2 weeks ago, they released about a 42-minute long program, which, as you'll find when you listen to the rest of the show, was basically a tool by which the government could convict these guys in the court of public opinion after they'd already been found not guilty of the very salacious charges pushed against them, which resulted in them becoming political prisoners who remained in jail for 2.5 years before even going to trial because the charges against them were so crazy, but then those charges they were found not guilty of. And nobody's asking, why is it in Canada we have political prisoners? What happened with this case? Why were these guys kept that long? Why was it prosecuted in this way? Oh no, the Fifth Estate wants to relitigate it and show you and put in your mind the idea that despite what happened in the courtroom and despite the findings of the jury, these men are guilty. These men are guilty of wrongthink, and you should continue to hate them, and fear anybody else in your country who thinks like them. That's all that's going on here. So myself and a panel watched the whole thing and recorded it all together on Zoom and deconstructed what the Fifth Estate had done in smearing their own citizens. It's long. I hope some of you can stick around to hear the whole thing, but there's a lot of details. Those of you who've followed this show for a long time full well understand that, like, a major court case like this, with the charges such as they were, there was a lot going on. And, even if you listen to this whole 3 hour plus presentation, you're still not going to get it all. But, we had to respond. We can't just let the government continue to lie about these guys and lie about them even after a jury of their supposed peers found them not guilty of this very serious crime. I don't want to keep you too long. It's a long enough show without this long-ass intro. But if you can't make it all the way to the end, I enjoin my listeners to, if you can, write a letter to Tony and Chris. They're still incarcerated. They're still at the Drumheller Institution. There's going to be over 3 years that they've been in jail based on charges that they were found not guilty of. And then we have this injustice of the judge doing an end run around the not guilty verdict to put them in jail longer on minor other charges. The whole thing sucks. So yeah, please go check in the show notes. Write Tony and Chris a letter. If you can spare a couple of bucks to help defray their legal costs, there's also links to where you can donate for that. And, just think about these guys missing yet another Christmas with their families. Tony Olienick's mom, Tessie's like 83, 84 years old. Tony's her only son, and he's in jail essentially for thought crime. This is Canada in 2024, kids. You know, we have all these people from the Freedom Convoy still being persecuted by the government simply for having an opinion you may or may not agree with. It's disgusting, and I think the least you can do is write these guys a letter and just express some solidarity with one of your fellow citizens. All right, I'm not going to hold you up anymore. Let's get to it. Everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. Today I've got a special one for you. I've assembled a panel. I hate to call it a documentary, but a propaganda piece from Canadian Pravda, the Fifth Estate, who recently released a show about the Coutts boys and that whole situation, which myself and all of my guests here have been covering to a more or lesser of a degree and very well. One of my guests is intimately involved in it in a couple of ways. Alex, the amazing Zoltan, independent journalist from British Columbia that's been tearing up the internet and Twitter as of late. The Twitter anon Buck McYoung, who's been doing some pretty great threads investigating documents from the Canadian government, which most people are never going to see, showing some inconvenient truths, facts, and problems in the government's handling of COVID, the Freedom Convoy, and much else. And last but certainly not least, Jacqueline Martin, Coutts protester herself and a wife of Jerry Morin, a politically persecuted prisoner who did 2 years in jail for standing up for your rights and freedoms, which we are all losing rapidly. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Gord, for having us.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for coming. So I want to preface this with, this is going to be a sort of like, I guess, a bit of a sort of media dissection, critical analysis sort of show. I have yet to see this episode of the Fifth Estate because I've been very busy. Two of my guests have watched it. And I've had my own interactions with the CBC. I officially complained to the ombudsman for their terrible lack of coverage and or slanted coverage when they did bother to about this case. The CBC did reply to me, and their answers were less than sufficient. Let's put it that way. They seem to believe they've been covering this story fairly, and even though they have not really spoken to anybody on the defense side of this case for about 2.5 years, 3 years since it got rolling. Actually, we're almost at the 3-year anniversary of the Freedom Convoy here in a couple months. And, as others here will point out, the CBC, on the contrary, has run interference for the government, repeating lies, smears, and generally doing their damnedest to create a poisoned jury pool before these guys even went to trial. And on that note, I'm going to hand it to Jacqueline. She has a few things to say before we get going.
Thanks, Gord. Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand what the role that CBC played in the persecution of political dissidents in this country, not just during COVID, but for probably decades, honestly, but especially after the arrests and the official police narrative, which was adopted into an even more flamboyant Crown narrative. The original information that was put out was highly publication banned due to the protection of the men from having the court of public opinion already make a decision long before a jury pool was ever established. And we fought very hard through court to have these what were called ITOs, which is your information to obtain. So the statements put together by police based off of unvetted, unavailable evidence from undercover agents. So we were successful in October 22nd, 2022. We did get the publication bans put on so that the media could not publish the contents of these untested, unchallenged ITOs. And much to our surprise and disappointment, CBC violated that publication ban on the same day that it was put in place. We actually were alerted to that by their own legal team via a letter that was submitted to the court, their own admission that they had done so. But they were quite confident and assured the court that they had corrected their quote unquote mistake by taking down the link to the article where they had published the full contents of the ITO that had just been publication banned. Now, to the contrary, weeks later, there were several screenshots floating around of that article with that information on places like Reddit, where that information was still being broadcasted. I'll say I did. I can only speak for myself. I put pressure on the legal team to address this because it was a concern that unfortunately, we hadn't even gotten to the point of a pretrial yet, let alone getting into a jury selection, that this information was floating around for public knowledge. The legal team did nothing with it, unfortunately, until the spring, or I guess early or late winter, February into March of 2023, when we found out that the CBC was once again, up to their own shenanigans, were attempting to put together this documentary that we're about to view, and to put that out again to disparage the men and to taint a jury pool. We still had not been to pretrial. This was only 4 months later from the original publication ban violation, and they were working on doing it again. They reached out to all of us. We'd all had encounters with them. Most people that were listed in the ITOs had encounters with them. We all shut them down vehemently. And then finally, the legal team sent off a strongly worded letter to them, reminding them of the publication bans and the fact that we would not put up with a documentary being released prior to a trial and these publication bans being lifted. So lo and behold, it never materialized, thank goodness. But we're about to see the fruits of their so-called efforts, I guess, here momentarily, of what they were able to scrape together, because no one from Camp Coutts was interested in participating. We were reached out to yet again, and once again, shut them down. There's absolutely no benefit in engaging with a state propagandist who is just looking for ways to twist your words and misquote you to their advantage, which I think Chris Carbert got the feel of that when he made the call to them to ask them to please reconsider, and they made him out to be some conspiracy theorist wingnut. Twisted his words immediately into,
Right.
to make him seem like he's crazy from jail. So
I want to add to what you just said, Jacqueline. I've also criticized the media extensively, and I want to make sure that people understand the difference between, or understand what exactly the publication bans applied to. As you said, very strictly to those ITOs. There was nothing stopping the CBC from engaging in what we might understand as proper journalism, holding power to account. There was nothing stopping the CBC from investigating why your husband and why Tony Olienick were kept in pretrial solitary confinement. There was nothing stopping them from asking why they were denied bail, even though none of them had any real criminal record to speak of. There was nothing stopping them from asking any number of questions about the prosecution of this case, all of the smoke from all of the just weird stuff that was happening that was not subject to any publication bans. And they asked exactly 0 questions about any of that, because that's not their role. Their role is to be a state propagandist. I mean, for lack of a better term, these guys are not out there to inform the public. They're not out there to do anything fair and balanced. And the last almost 3 years of this case ongoing, it's just proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the CBC are not to be trusted for anything. So, I mean, it's clear as day why you guys chose not to participate with them. And I guess we're going to see some more of it here in a few minutes.
Before you jump into it, I just want to preface the listener here that, generally what this documentary presents as accepted is the theory of the case that was explicitly rejected by the jury, right? No one was convicted of any violence or any conspiracy to commit violence, right? And this same effort. Oh, go ahead, Sultan.
What you're about to see did not come before the jury or the trial at all. So my caution would be to not be reactionary. I have reacted to this many times, is to just take a big deep breath, guys. This is going to blow your minds.
And it's good that we get to do this after the trial, because, you know, had they done this beforehand, we wouldn't be able to push back and note that the jury explicitly rejected the storytelling that's going to occur here. You're not going to hear till the very closing minutes.
Respectfully, the jury did not even hear the storytelling you're about to see. This is
Right.
not relevant to the trial.
Right. But the pretrial took out all of the garbage, or most of the garbage
Exactly.
that was being perpetrated against the men. Again, we'll get into it as we go through this, but most of the evidence tested was unlawful.
Yep, and
Unlawful.
and let's go, guys. Let's get into
it.
All right, so I'm gonna do the screen share thing here. Hold on a minute.
Take a big deep breath, everyone.
Yep.
So well, as you're figuring as you're figuring this out, Gord, I think that this is worth taking a pause on itself. This picture. Why is this picture in the documentary? This is exactly what I was just saying. This was not in the trial. They know this. Why, if it wasn't good enough for the trial, why is it good enough for the documentary? We're 3 years removed from when this picture was taken.
And if they were really doing journalism, they would be showing this picture as a way to say that this picture was presented as evidence, even though we learned later on that they didn't even have a warrant actually to confiscate anything that's in this picture. They used an illegitimate warrant because, as according to the ATIPs, which Buck can chime in on, right up until the 12th, which was the day before the arrests of the three men, Tony, Chris, and Chris, were made at Coutts. The police had never confirmed or verified that there was any firearms present anywhere near the protest.
But what they did do is search the cross-reference license plates against personal firearms licenses to identify individuals who were present and owned firearms. So Absolutely. They were profiling as early as February 2nd protesters based on the likelihood that they would have firearms at their residences.
Correct.
Which is why I've long said that this was an attack on Albertans culturally, because if you're trying to create the impression that there's a militia, we'll just go to Alberta. I mean, everybody owns a gun. It's just, yeah. This picture, though, it wasn't good enough for trial. We still don't know, in the court of law at least. Some people claim that they know anecdotally what the chain of custody is for these weapons. So if we don't know who these weapons belong to, why are they in the documentary?
Exactly.
Because
and we still don't know. There's been no confirmation. What you're seeing in this picture, no, I couldn't tell you what belongs to who, or who the owners, complete a list of owners are. All I can tell you is that there's nothing in that picture that belongs to Jerry or myself. Not one thing in that picture.
And I certainly don't think the CBC knows.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, nobody has been convicted of owning a firearm illegally, right?
That's true. That's true. Well, actually, no. Chris Lysak, that was the plea that he caught. He had improper storage, I think it was, or something.
Improper storage, but of a legal firearm. So all of the firearms we're talking about are legal firearms.
Correct.
Which is in this picture, I believe. Like his handgun would be in this picture. Not that it's
as well as a BB gun. I'll note. There's
but you know what's
BB gun
interesting?
Pictured in here.
The weapons found in Jerry's truck, which we'll hear about later in this production, as I like to call it, is not in this picture.
No. And they're not illegal. There's nothing illegal about the storage of the weapons that they seized from him either. They were properly stored behind the seat, as is allowed in transporting of your legally owned firearms, with the ammunition stored in the front or in the glove box.
It totally validates my theory that if you wanted to create the impression of a militia, just find some Albertans, because they didn't even get all of the guns. There were more guns that they could have put in the picture if they were patient.
Can we move on?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, everybody's favorite guy.
I mean, did you notice what they started with? Conspiracy in Coutts, the tagline there as they kick it off. Literally the thing that didn't happen. is how they
Yes.
title all this.
I still can't hear it very well. I don't know if I'm alone on that, but as Gord figures that out, I think that's a great thing to talk about is the title of the documentary, how ridiculous that is.
The following program contains coarse language. Viewer discretion is advised.
On this edition of The Fifth Estate, we return to the pandemic, a time of mandates, lockdowns, and chaos in the streets across Canada.
I hope every border in Canada's blocked. There's no excuses. This is war.
But in the background, a movement was taking shape, prepared to confront the government with violence.
The dangerous criminal activity was real and organized.
A high-risk undercover operation. Allegations of a plot to murder police officers.
They had in their crosshairs agents of the state.
Video never before broadcast shows police trying to crack a group fueled by conspiracies.
I told you, man, there was no plan for nothing.
What happens when people come out from behind their screens and act?
The danger is that one person in 100 will commit an act that might be awful.
I'm Stephen D'Souza. This is The Fifth Estate.
So let's pause there.
Do we want to pause
Jacqueline,
there?
Yeah, what thoughts do you have right off the bat?
Just that these people are living in an alternate universe than anybody that was there or that's involved. Like the statement by the dark fellow with the glasses that said they had agents in their crosshairs. What?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
that's a bold statement.
I'd say these are defamatory statements now that we've had a trial.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I again, so Jacqueline, when we did the intro to the show, you talked about legal teams and going back and forth with CBC's legal department. People in a similar situation would have reviewed this before hitting send, and maybe they aren't listening to me or you or us, and maybe they believe that there was actual evidence of targeting of police officers, which doesn't actually exist, never presented at trial. The jury saw through it. They ruled not guilty on the conspiracy. Nobody was ever planning to kill cops whatsoever, but they open with that. So, I mean, this should be interesting for the rest of the show.
Yeah, well, but a journalistic outlet shouldn't be going on belief when they had every opportunity to sit in that courtroom during pretrial trial and find out what evidence was tested and wasn't tested and what was acceptable and wasn't acceptable and actually report on that. We don't work off of belief systems here. You have facts and no facts. And the CBC would like to just live in an emotional state based off of state narrative with no regard at all whatsoever for what actual reality dictates.
And I promised I'd keep my mouth shut, but I just want to pause for one moment and reflect on the title, Conspiracy in Coutts. So they call it like Conspiracy in Coutts. That was the one charge that they were deemed not guilty of. Could you imagine if you were accused of murdering your wife and you were deemed not guilty by a jury, or the charges were dropped entirely, and then the CBC made a documentary called Wife Murderer?
Well, here's the truth, Alex. There was a conspiracy in Coutts. It was a conspiracy of malicious prosecution.
Absolutely.
Like that's what went on here. So that title, gives the wrong impression about really who did the dirty deed here. And I'm sure we'll get into it.
100%.
All right, let's keep rolling.
So, February 14th, 2022.
So did you speak to a lawyer? Correct.
These men are about to face off against the very force they're accused of plotting to murder.
Can we stop there just for a quick second?
It's on edge.
Something I want to make note of right there. First of all, that was an edited clip of Tony. The original, when we were in pretrial and we watched Tony's interview, Tony asked to speak to a lawyer. And the cop told him that he'd already talked to his lawyer, or that he would call him himself, sorry. He left the room and came back and said, I talked to your lawyer, and he doesn't have any new or has any advice for you at this time. Okay? From our understanding, Tony never talked to a lawyer. The cops, which is, I've never heard of this before. I don't know anybody else. Have you ever heard a time when the cops called the lawyer for you to get your advice for you? Because that's the video that I saw in the courtroom during pre-trial.
And as you may, I think it's like around the 5-hour, 45-minute mark of that interview, he asked to speak to a lawyer, and he isn't given one.
Absolutely.
Every lawyer in North America will tell you exactly the same thing if you are subject to interrogation by the police, whether it's a one-on-one in a room or you've been pulled over at the side of the road. You do not talk to the fucking cops unless you have a lawyer present. End of story. So obviously these guys, this police officer is lying, and the CBC is lying to their viewers by clipping this the way they did. Let's keep going.
And
guilty,
sorry, go ahead, Buck.
And guilty men don't give 6-hour interviews with the cops.
And I just want to point out that what we learned, like Tony had never been arrested before in his life. He never even had a speeding ticket. He's not familiar with the process and what he was entitled to or his rights under those conditions. So it was quite easy for a cop to say, I called a lawyer for you. He doesn't have any extra advice. He didn't know the difference. Just want to note that.
Okay, guys, we're 1 minute and 34 seconds in. I told you we're never going to make it, but let's keep going. Okay.
The RCMP feared a small group was armed and about to spark a shootout with police.
There's two sides to this, right? And one light, right, that you're an extremist, and there's another people that then you're a hero standing up for your principles, right? So my job here is just to find out what the truth is.
The Fifth Estate has been investigating the story for almost 3 years. For most of that time, key evidence could not be published to protect the men's right to a fair trial. That left a void.
Investigating this story for 3 fucking years? You lying fucking cocksuckers! Jesus Christ! They have done everything possible to ignore this story.
Exactly. And I needed to pause there because what you are about to see is the video version of the article they published February 14th, 2022. And so I think that statement that they just made was an error in judgment on their part, because it's a tacit admission that they tainted the jury pool. What you are about to see does not differ materially in any regard whatsoever from the article they published February 14th, 2022. So if you were to sue them for damages for tainting the jury pool, that's your golden egg. This documentary is a gift, everyone.
Here's a little bit more inside information that people need to know about, again, that we learned from pretrial, and the reason why the Chris Carbert's police interview was challenged. What the outside world won't know, if you're not told, as to why he looks so distressed in that interview. Chris takes a medication that causes a chemical withdrawal when he doesn't take it on time and properly, and he was without medication. He was without medication for the entire process of his interview, even though he had asked several times and explained to the police, look, I'm not in a position, I'm not able to have a conversation with you. I'm in distress. I need this medication. Can you please get it for me? Which they withheld for hours and hours and hours. So the distress that you see, the rocking back and forth, the groaning, the noises, Chris is actually experiencing chemical withdrawal. I think people need to understand that.
Okay, you guys ready? Yeah.
Yeah, hit play. I see you paused on a very unflattering
and misinformation. Now that the trial is over, we can finally take you inside the police investigation and inside the world of the accused. Early 2022, downtown Ottawa under siege, a face-off over vaccine mandates.
I'm staying. I'm not leaving until the mandates are gone.
Anger spread across Canada. Blockades multiplied. But the RCMP conducted its most serious operation here, on the border with Montana, in the small village of Coutts, Alberta.
I hope every border in Canada is blocked. I hope the country shuts down.
Some protesters were openly hostile towards the government, police, and mainstream media.
You guys start telling the truth.
You guys have helped destroy this country.
You're the enemy.
Get out of here.
You are the enemy of Canada.
Protesters effectively shut down Alberta's most important port of entry to pressure the authorities to withdraw COVID safety measures.
You betcha.
Among those drawn to the protest, Marco Van Hugenbos.
It was just a feeling of hope that finally there was a part of society that had said, this is enough.
How had you been feeling during the pandemic leading up to these protests?
Frustration with the COVID mandates, restrictions, the inconsistencies by health authorities and governments.
Where are my brothers? He's right beside you.
Van Hugenbos was a town councillor in nearby Fort McLeod. He quickly became a leader and the face of the Coutts blockade.
This is a big protest. It's a big rally here. I love it. But keeping it peaceful and making sure that nobody steps on the line is our responsibility and my biggest concern.
Protesters would gather at a roadside restaurant.
So it's kind of our little headquarters. The Smuggler's Saloon, it's called. Fits the names perfect there.
This is Tony Olienick. He drove from Claresholm about 2 hours away, where he ran a gravel pit and trucking company. He filmed regular updates from the protest.
Well, she's 5 a.m. start here. The little convoy is getting organized. It's going to be a great, marvelous day.
In the early days, it was very, I won't say chaotic because that sounds like there's a riot going on, but it was very disorganized. And it doesn't impact on the airport.
Coutts Mayor Jim Willett and his council were not prepared for their village to be overrun.
It's like herding cats because you get them in a group.
Do we want to pause or do we want to keep going?
I mean, just slide it forward so you stop catching my face in these weird contortions.
Am I? I'm sorry. I don't mean to. It's not purposeful. So I was on another podcast again, person shall not be named, but there was a journalist there from the Western Standard. She made a very good point here. Jim Willett says this was disorganized. But you'll see in a moment here, Marco Mendocino says that this was a very organized group. Both things obviously cannot be true simultaneously. So there. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
I was going to say, I think it's important to note, like you can go into the POEC and watch this man's testimony. The way that, so it's important to note that he was calling the press on a daily basis, urging for the press
to call them terrorists.
To call them terrorists. He actually
Bill Graveland specifically.
As well as the Canadian press was one. I think Canadian press was the first ones that he got to engage with that.
But the journalist specifically was Bill Graveland.
Yeah. So
that fuck.
So
Bill,
the mayor was
massive comorbidities, Graveland.
And the mayor also at the very end of his questionable testimony, where one would question whether he was sober or not, quite honestly. He really got down to the brass tacks of what he was concerned about, and that was that his investments, his personal investments, he thought were being impacted by the protest. So that was at the very end of the day. He really doesn't give shit about his town or anything. And 2/3 or more of his town actually were open arms welcoming the protest and supported it, as a matter of fact. So he was kind of an oddball out in his own town during that time, and certainly didn't speak for the majority of the residents there. So I just want to throw a little context into Mr. Mayor's commentary.
As for Bill Graveland, I've never told this story publicly before. I was at the trial, as you may recall, and he came out of the trial because they were running late one day, dealing with some legal matter. I can't remember what it was. And I saw him interact with one of the sheriffs in the Lethbridge courthouse. And he says, "Oh, how was it today?" And Bill Graveland said, "Oh, as you can imagine, everyone was staring at me again." And I just thought to myself, like, wow, man, like, you're the last person anybody wants to look at. like really? Like, you really believe that?
Well, it just goes like, there's the sort of self-absorption of our media case, as represented by this dude. Anyway, yeah, I can't make this about Graveland.
I might also point out that during his POEC testimony, he made reference to whether he saw this or he didn't see this or he just made this up, but he claimed that him and his wife lived directly across from a hotel, which I didn't know if there was a hotel in Coutts. I mean, I'm not that familiar. I know Smuggler's Saloon was the only place I'd ever been in the town ever when I was there. So I guess it's not this far out of this world.
It's the only business I could find when I was there as well.
But apparently there is
one. It wasn't open.
It was right across the road from his house, apparently. And he claimed in his testimony that him and his wife watched people bring hockey bags in and out of this hotel room, which don't forget about the infamous hockey bag narrative that never materialized anywhere.
It does come up.
Just
it
garbage.
It comes up in the documentary.
Ah, okay, excellent. But yeah.
On that note, I'll let her rip.
Group, and you make what you think is a decision, and then go out the door, and it all goes sideways.
Days into the blockade, police went to smugglers to give protesters an ultimatum: open the highway or be arrested.
We're giving you choices.
In the crowd recording the confrontation, Tony Olienick.
Just trying to intimidate and pressure and coerce a bunch of freedom-loving truckers and people that are here. It's mind-blowing.
I don't know. My wife calls it a spidey sense. Like you sense that something is not right.
The RCMP also sensed something wasn't right. Kelly Sundberg took a look at the police investigation for the Fifth Estate. He's a criminologist at Mount Royal University and walked us through how police identified the four men.
I think that they realized that through their existing network of information and intelligence that this was gathering momentum and very quickly, and that it could get out of control. Moving the undercover officers in there was a prudent step.
After a week of trucks blocking the highway, the RCMP sent undercover officers to infiltrate Smuggler's Saloon to understand what the protest leaders were planning.
So just to clarify, they say the undercovers went in, a week after the protest started, but they had identified the targets of their investigations as early as February 2nd, based on the license plates and the personal firearms.
I'd also like to point out that there's something very manipulative going on here, which is that the video footage they're showing is not footage from the police. The police claim that they had no footage. So what they're showing is social media footage for, I believe it's Tony's account. It doesn't really matter. But they're creating the impression that the police had documented undercover wire. Like there's no documentation that anything that occurred happened.
And I want to repeat, there's going to be some people watching this. I've had trouble even with friends of mine in Alberta that I used to drive truck with out there, and people that are, might be described as normies, who saw the accusations from the ITOs, which should have never been out there before the trial. And then as the trial got going, and Graveland did this again, repeating from court the reading of the ITOs, that there was never any recordings of any of this, not video, not audio, nothing. It was the cops' word versus everybody else. Not a single shred of evidence ever backed up what was said in those ITOs. Zero.
That's right. That's
nothing.
right.
Yes.
Nothing.
And again, if CBC had bothered to come to the pre-trial, although they couldn't have reported on it then, they would have the facts that they could actually put into the documentary after the fact, now that we are allowed to report on what took place there. And they would know that on February 2nd, yes, that's when the undercover operation started, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the four men that they arrested. They actually were, their reason, because here's the thing, you can't just investigate citizens. Like, protesting your government is not an investigatable offense, okay? Like, you need to come up with something in order to, for the cops need something in order to actually investigate, the average citizen when there's no crime being done.
Right. And
but in this case, there is, because they're blocking order. Right.
Well, no, actually, that's not correct either, Alex. We know from the CBSA reports that we obtained for the trial that the CBSA did not consider the border to be blocked at all whatsoever, except for one day, which was January the 12th, which was on their direction from the RCMP to close the border. That's the only day that the border was closed per the CBSA themselves. Okay, so we need to also make sure that that information is put out there as well, because the
I didn't know that.
Never rendered inoperable except for when the RCMP ruled it to be.
Another point I want to make here really quickly, video and when they started monitoring the guys, right? They've already mentioned Tony. Tony Olienick does not come up in any of the RCMP reports or anything as a suspect or someone that they should be looking into by their own documents till February 9th.
Exactly. So from the 2nd to the 9th, we heard this from Officer Michaud, who was the officer that they brought in to do the wiretap applications, authorizations, and setup, which they used 184.4, which is an unconstitutional law at this point. It has a ton of issues around it and a ton of very specific standard operating procedures when you are going to use it, which were not followed. But Mr. Michaud testified under oath during pretrial that they had decided to investigate members of the Netherlands Reformed Church of Fort Macleod, who they consider the Netherlands Reformed Church to be an extremist organization in Canada. They have designated it such. They say that there was 5 men in the country that are directly tied to the original roots of that church, and they said 3 of them were present at the Coutts border blockade, and they were the people that they were investigating originally. How that changed on February 9th, we did not get to learn the chain of custody on that as to why that changed, but it did.
Is it fair to say that we can assume who those 3 people were?
No, because I'm not going to make any assumptions. There was never any names provided, so we don't know who those people were. We just know that that's who, and quite honestly, Alex, do we even know that, like, does that even, like, because what list, and like what list can we verify that they, like, because let's be honest, the term extremism has no legal definition. It's just a word that they use to make things sound scary, but there is no legal definition of it in the code, in the court of law, nothing. So this whole, we designated them extremists, I mean, where's your extremist list and how does it have legal, validity? Don't get me wrong. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody here. I'm just telling you what they regurgitate, which we know that, I mean, my heavens, if you're a white Christian male in this country, according to Miss Barbara Perry, Dr. Barbara Perry, then you're automatically an extremist of some sort. So, I mean,
we'll talk about it more, but the ATIPs that I've been looking at show how the ideologically motivated violent extremist and religiously motivated violent extremist framework for domestic terrorism was imported to Canada at the behest of the FBI. And so what you saw in Coutts is the deployment of both of those categorizations against folks under the auspices of national security.
Yeah.
All right, is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Go on. Okay.
This is not a simple operation. These are very tight communities for 5 outsiders to just show up. So these are highly skilled officers that were clearly very effective in their duties.
We obtained court records where the agents describe, in their own words, what happened next. A protester calls Tony Olienick a leader, so the undercover officers arrange to meet him. Olienick tells them he sees the blockade as a revolution.
These officers not only had to play the role that they did, but then they had to go and create the reports to activate the next phase.
Olienick says he's been surveilling the police's movements and considers himself protest security, along with Chris Lysak from nearby Lethbridge. Olienick describes Lysak as a hitman, a sharpshooter, and a long-range sniper.
I won't leave till shit changes, written in stone. My kids aren't going to grow up in this shit.
The undercover officers also report back that Olienick boasted of stockpiles of guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition, enough to outfit every protester and smugglers to fight if they needed to, and that he believes cops should all be hung.
This launched the investigation from simply a intelligence, what's happening position to.
Hey, Jacqueline, you muted yourself.
Look at the wording there in that statement from these undercovers, okay? They told me or us. Was it me or was it us? Who is us? Like, there's so many weird things in the way that they made their notes, in which we learned that not all of their notes were even made on the same day that they supposedly had these conversations. Just FYI.
Why were they relying on notes? Why didn't they have, I don't know, a hidden camera, a hidden tape recorder? Like, if they're doing undercover, you think they'd be collecting evidence?
And don't you think it's the CBC's responsibility to point out that there was no such data? There was nothing was collected of that kind.
Right. These notes are quite irrelevant, quite honestly, because it's hearsay is all it is.
I also just wanted to pause and reflect for a moment that they overlaid the pictures of Tony with the trial record. So and it's an excerpt. So they're acknowledging that they have a transcript of the trial. Right. So that eliminates any possibility of them saying, well, we didn't know any better. Clearly, whether they have the transcript or not, they're claiming by inference that they do. And that's
right.
Yeah. Okay, guys, sorry. Oh, one other thing. One other thing before we move on. He said that the police officers should be hung. This has been taken out of context a million times. I was there at the day of the trial. What he said is that the police officers will hang themselves by their own words, is what he said. So
wow, that's some pretty. So the CBC is not the first to do this. Graveland, all the people who ran the Canadian press stuff, other reporters that have repeated the same thing. Like the media everywhere are accused constantly of ripping things out of context, lying by omission, failing to give you the whole story. And here we go again, where they're trying to say that Tony Olienick's got murder in his heart, when all he's saying is, hey, the government and the cops are going to hang themselves.
Yeah, and even if you did say, I think all cops should be hung, you're also doing away with the distinction between cause and intent. Like, I can have cause to want to kill my ex-wife. Doesn't mean I intend to. Right. People make these statements all the time. There's nothing illegal about it. Right. It's not advisable. You shouldn't say that you want people to be harmed.
And again,
people do.
Again, these ITOs, these statements that are being ripped out of context, this was the locus of the Crown's conspiracy charge. This was the conspiracy they made up and then accused them of a conspiracy. And in court, none of that intent was ever established, thus not guilty.
Exactly. But they're not providing you that context. Okay, sorry, everyone. I promise to keep my mouth shut. Okay, I'm going to try to stick to that. Bear with me.
Oh my God, this could unfold into a firefight. This could unfold into extreme violence.
Meanwhile, the agents continue to gain Olienick's trust. He introduces them to another protester, Chris Carbert, also from Lethbridge and Lysak's childhood friend.
And how were they gaining trust? They were cozying up in a female-male style, flirtatious, honing in on a single man in his 40s with two young female undercovers, FYI. I think that's important to Yeah,
it is, because this came up on the podcast that shall not be named, but there was a journalist on there who asked Betty Carbert, she said, do you think that your son was targeted for any specific reason? I think we know what that reason is. He was single and testosterone was high, and it is what it is. Yeah.
And they use honeypots all the time, even though they claim not to. This is not a new strategy of the police, FYI.
And if they have the documents related to the trial, they have a journalistic, in my opinion, responsibility to report on that element of the trial, because it was there. It was evident. That was part of the trial. Why are we not mentioning that?
Mm-hmm. And the defense did push back on the undercovers for the fact that there was, the what do you call it? The use of their personal female assets to gain trust from their targets, which they vehemently denied with no proof to back themselves up, of course. Just take their word for it.
May I make one statement here on that point before we get rolling again? It should be noted that Justice Lebrenz agreed with the Crown and with the rejection of the cops, saying, it's offensive to him that it's implied that the female undercovers, sexuality or gender would be used in such a way, as if to grant some sort of credence to just ignore reality, which is what we're told every day in the media. Gender is a construct. Men and women don't exist. You can transition and be whatever you want. What happened in this case in the courtroom where the justice tried to deny that is of a piece of the culture we live in now, where we live in a transhumanist sort of driven society where all of this stuff is completely fucking fluid and we can just ignore biology at will, even in a court of law. Carry on.
Well, Lebrenz did get in a lot of trouble himself because he kept calling the jury ladies and gentlemen. So that I don't think, I actually don't think that he's as woke as maybe we're presenting him as. He's just an old guy. He's trying his best. Okay, sorry guys. Here, I'll go.
Four. Olienick and Carbert take the agents to meet a fourth man, Jerry Morin. Olienick had met Carbert and Morin a few months earlier. Police had arrested
Jerry never met any undercover agents. That never happened.
The agents, Carbert and Olienick, then...
Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Yeah, there was never any interaction between Jerry and any other undercover cops, ever. That's that never happened.
That footage that they just showed, though, where is that from? That's from Calgary, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah. So Jerry was actually targeted by the police, the Calgary police, and I believe it was December 2020 at an anti-mask rally that we had attended. That actually, it was the very next day after the female officers had assaulted the 19-year-old boy on the outdoor skating
hockey rink.
Had assaulted him, cut his skates off, and drug him off to the gulag. Yeah. We went to the rally the next day, and Jerry and his brother Mark dressed up in hockey gear and played street hockey in front of the march. The police were very insulted by that. And as we were getting ready to leave a very successful rally that day, they surrounded us and they jumped Mark and Jerry, assaulted the hell out of them, drugged them inside the city town hall, because that's where the protest was taking place, was on the town hall steps there, and they went missing for a little bit, and were released with some bogus charges, which were all dropped because the arrest was unlawful in itself. So nothing came of that other than a nice picture. On the front page of the Calgary Sun, that there had been a clash with protesters, but that there was never a clash. They jumped them as we were literally leaving. It was 3:00. We were done our protest. We were trying to get out. They swarmed him. The bicycle police swarmed them and then assaulted them. And I've got all kinds of picture and video evidence of that actually still to this day. But yeah, that's where that came from, FYI.
Well, and it's a very old clip. Like, that's 4 years removed. I had never even heard of this incident. It really is kind of innocuous, whatever. Like, we've all, whatever, who cares? It's no big deal. But I wonder, do you think that, like, the fact that the CBC is showing this, knowing the level of collusion now between the CBC, I believe, like, it's very evident that there's collusion between the CBC, the RCMP, and the government, that maybe that was why your husband was targeted. Was because
I do think that they used that, like, in their profiling, of course. They were like, oh, look, this, right? And we're like, yeah, we're gonna, because I can tell you right now, there was never any interaction. They say they took these, that Olienick took Jerry, or took these undercovers to meet Jerry. Never happened. Jerry and I had zero interactions with any undercover female police officers. We actually saw them, which I testified to the effect, in the field the night that we delivered the socks and underwear for the guys. And they were sitting in an SUV, and they left as soon as we got there, actually. And they never even offered to interact with us, actually, at all whatsoever. So, and there was never any evidence brought forward from undercovers that they had spoke or had any conversations at all with Jerry. So this is just straight falsehoods.
And drove to the train tracks to meet Jerry, who was coming with the package. Olienick tells the officers it's coming in a hockey bag, and reportedly nods when they ask if he's talking about guns. RCMP handlers told the agents to leave for their own safety.
As soon as those officers heard that, and you can see that from the court documents, they very quickly realized that imminent danger existed.
The Fifth Estate obtained heavily redacted, handwritten police reports. An agent on the ground said they suspected a cache of firearms and warned the protest had become a breeding ground for extremists. The next day, an officer reports on a conversation with an unnamed source. Concern can get violent, civil war, and see government removed.
They had to act quickly because the more unknown elements makes it more dangerous, more unpredictable what the outcome will be.
An unnamed source who was never a witness, FYI. So did that person exist? Who knows?
How significant?
Right? We talked to an unnamed source. Really? Well, this source should be a witness then, should they not? I mean...
What was the name of the unnamed source? I don't even know. Like,
no, there wasn't. This is, again, what is this?
Exactly, Jacqueline. This is a hallucinogenic fever dream, this documentary. I don't know what this is. It's certainly not informational. What is this?
The notion that there was a bag of guns that was getting smuggled past 2 checkpoints of RCMP, for some handoff. If they actually thought that was a theory, wouldn't they be searching vehicles and seeking to seize that evidence?
Why wouldn't they have surrounded us? Why wouldn't they have surrounded us right then and there? If my truck was loaded up with all these fucking supposed guns, and they were sitting right there as we showed up parked, why wouldn't they surround us and just...
Especially if
why would they use imminent threat to do an arrest right then and there?
Especially if they have undercovers in your midst without any recording or devices. Like, why wouldn't they be? Why didn't they even attempt to intercept? This supposed hockey bag full of weapons.
And then why didn't the police that we had to walk through and past at the checkpoint not do the same? Why? Because a backpack over your shoulder with a grocery bag tied to it obviously is not a cache of weapons.
Well, Jacqueline, who better to ask than yourself? You were there.
Right.
Imagine this is a court of law. Were there hockey bags? And if there were, we
don't even play hockey. I have no idea where this hockey bag idea came from. I mean, I don't seriously, like,
I find that there's no evidence that hockey bags ever existed.
And to my knowledge either. I don't own a hockey bag, never had a hockey bag.
It never came up in trial again. This idea of hockey bags never came up in trial.
Exactly. So Okay, we can move on. I just wanted to.
I just want to point out real quick, the RC. I mean, another thing this documentary is doing, like if you think critically about it, which I cannot guarantee on the part of wide swaths of the Canadian populace who were raised on this fucking garbage from the CBC, be it radio or television, the RCMP are telling on themselves through your very questions and through the evidence we're seeing. If it's imminent harm, if you believe there are guns, if you had checkpoints, if you had the whole protest site locked down, if there actually were guns, how did they get through? What are you guys doing? Oh, that's right. This is the same RCMP that let 20 plus people get fucking murdered in Nova Scotia. You fucking clowns. Carry on.
Well, and it's Alberta. You should expect there to be guns everywhere. Like, that's just part of the culture. Anyway, going on.
How significant is it that police get an imminent harm wiretap?
This is authority used when there's a kidnapping or when there's a terrorist plot. Like, this is very, very rarely used.
It's unconstitutional as well. It's ruled by the Supreme Court, FYI. That's why it's very, very rarely used.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as a terrorist. Then, in another call, saying, we're gonna go to war at some point.
Fact check true. Justin Trudeau is a fucking terrorist. Carry on.
Date happening here Sunday night. We're all surrounded.
With a flood of intelligence from undercover officers and wiretaps, 2 weeks into the protest, heavily armed tactical units move in.
What are you guys doing? Why do you guys have guns? We don't have guns.
Trudeau's goons.
Put them away. We don't have guns. Put those away. Put them away, sir.
Chris Lysak was live streaming outside Smuggler's Saloon. Police allege he threatened an officer. He was placed under arrest.
By pretty heavily armed, militarized police. And behind me, there's a whole bunch of family, women, and kids. It's just unbelievable why they would do this.
FYI, the video evidence presented by from Lysak of his own arrest, as well as like 40 minutes after the fact, while his phone continued to record inside the vehicle. There is absolutely no threats at all whatsoever. You can listen to it yourself. That was dispelled during the trial as well. And so this alleged, this has already been counteracted, as well as you even do get to hear an interesting point on that arrest video where the arresting officer says, is talking to someone else on the phone in the front seat while Chris is in the back saying, did we get the right Chris?
Well, what also really upsets me about what we just watched there is where they claim that Tony Olienick saying that Justin Trudeau is a terrorist is a problem. You're allowed to call people a terrorist because you're a citizen. You have a right to freedom of expression. You're allowed to say that. A publisher is not allowed to call a citizen a terrorist. And that's exactly what this documentary is doing. So it's a very strange thing, right? Where they're saying like, oh, individuals shouldn't be able to call the government a terrorist, but the government can call individuals a terrorist. That's spooky and odd to me. Anyway, I'll keep going.
Filming.
What is that? Look at this. Tear gas, AR-15.
Police arrested him, too.
Charlie 2, did the deploy snipers.
I just want to note, hey, Alex, press pause for a minute. So this video they just played from Tony's Instagram where he's talking about, there's women and children here and the cops have all these guns. They cut it off before Tony Olienick says, I wish they would just put their guns down and come and have coffee with us. Man, wouldn't it be nice for Canadians to know that one of their fellow citizens who is doing nothing except standing up for your rights that have been fucking eliminated by the government as of these days, all he wanted to do is talk to the cops and talk to the government, have a coffee and hash it out. Just come talk to us. Same as in Ottawa, where the government refused to, and they fucking cut it off.
Good, I can tell you why, though. The government specifically cultivated the narrative that this was seditious, right? It was the thing they tried to get the guys to plead to, what they wouldn't. It's the thing that Mark Carney came on TV, gave interviews and said this is an occupation, an insurrection. We had comments from the Chief Justice Wagner. I'm telling you, like, this is central to the narrative, because if it is seditious or, things like that MOU from James Bowder, implied some non-constitutional change of power, then the government, by treaty under the Five Eyes, cannot negotiate with them. And that's why they didn't want to come out and talk to protesters, and why they tried to push this bullshit narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and don't forget, too, that Tony and Chris were both arrested in the middle of a crowd. The only thing they were armed with were their phones, filming. That's what they were armed. That's how they were armed.
And
with,
I think
citizen journalists with a phone.
And to Gord's point, you can do a lot with documentaries, right? Like, you can stylize things. So I made a documentary about this. If you use the exact same clips and you overlay it, instead of this spooky boop, 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 boop music, with some Motown music, the whole context changes completely. and if you just don't cut certain things out, you have a lot of freedom and a lot of liberty, right, as a documentarian, and we're watching them really stretch it. I did the counter narrative. I stretched it as far as I could the other way.
I think that people should know, too, that we're just getting ready to see here where they're talking about the snipers are going in first. Understand they're getting ready to execute a warrant for documents and fucking data. They're doing it in the middle of the night. They're handling this as though that they were diffusing like a bomb situation, and they don't even have a single thing of threatening, material on that fucking warrant in order to breach the doors of any one of these places that you're just about to see. So I think that's
and what we are seeing here with this footage too is something we had never seen. This never came up in trial, and it was shocking because when I was watching it with Betty, like Chris's mom, the question was asked, "How do you feel knowing that your son was in the crosshairs of the agents?" Mm-hmm, going back to the beginning of the documentary, they said they have, it's the exact the truth is the opposite of the narrative being presented here. 100%. Citizens
and I'll note too, it took the tactical team an hour and a half to clear the trailer before the evidence team went in.
And not one single picture of any of the evidence that they found located where they found it in an hour and a half of clearing the trailer. They produced the picture that you saw at the beginning. That's what they produced. But we have nothing of any evidence to show that any of those guns were actually located in those trailers. We still don't have proof of that.
You will see a couple of pictures, and I think that Carbert actually admitted there were two guns in his trailer, but he was planning on going gopher hunting. He had gopher hunting bullets. So whatever. Anyway, okay, we'll keep going.
Okay, sir. RV Alpha appears to have somebody inside of it, and is the highest concern for us right now.
The court granted the Fifth Estate access to these recordings. For the first time, we can show you what happened as police raided a series of trailers blocks away from smugglers.
Occupants of the trailer, this is the police. Come on with your hands up and hands empty. Do it now.
Police find Chris Carbert inside one of the trailers.
Did he resist or did he surrender to you? You arrested without incident.
Says he's lone occupant. Says the people staying with him are in custody as well.
Did you get an identity on him?
That's our T1, Chris.
Still at large, Jerry Morin. Police intercept him on the highway, allegedly on his way back.
Not at large. There was, they knew exactly where he was. They had police detail at our house monitoring us from the day before. So he definitely was not at large. They had a detail on him for more than 24 hours.
I knew that was going to be the moment that would drive you completely insane. Because I know that. You've repeated the same thing a million times, including in front of the courts. This is outrageous. The CBC should know. They do know. This is defamatory and wrong.
And so do the cops, which is interesting that they get some criminology asshole from some university to come out and give their recounting rather than explaining them goddamn selves. And don't forget that we never, ever, ever spoke to the investigators. They had a layer between us and them. I was not allowed to be questioned by the people who were accusing me. They were in some other spot watching me through a video camera, CCTV, from some other third party that had no clue, just been vetted, with some information from them, had no firsthand knowledge of any of the accusations, was not making any of the accusations, and was actually a murder investigator from Airdrie. Just going to throw that out there too.
But they say that he was on his way to Coutts. We know he wasn't on his way to Coutts. He was going to Prudis, right? Which is the other direction.
Right. Well, actually, yeah, he was headed towards Millerville to his buddy Eddie O'Reilly's place. He was doing finishing up a lighting job in the cattle arena there for him, which the cops listened to him make that phone call. They had him wiretapped. They heard him call Eddie. They heard Eddie say, "Yep, no problem. No cows today. Come on down." They heard him call his brother, say, "I need to come get some tools so I can so I can finish this up. I'm headed to Eddie's." They knew all of this. They listened to him.
In a weird sense,
every single call that he made. That's another thing that they did wrong. You're not allowed to listen live on wiretaps, but
it's almost good that they did. It's almost good that they did because it exonerates you.
Well, don't listen. They didn't put forward those calls. We had to get affidavits signed and They didn't offer up that information, but we knew that they listened live because they had another phone call that they had no business in having. They had nobody of interest on it. That just so happened caught Jerry saying something inflammatory, and that's what they really wanted. So yeah.
And the picture of the guns really upsets me because you're allowed to own guns.
Yes.
You own those guns legally.
Absolutely.
And can we just point out, though, that none of those guns were at the border protest? All of those guns were seized from houses as far as 200 kilometers away from the protest site.
No, that's not entirely true. Not all. Not in the.
Some of them. That's why I said some of them. Some of them.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we don't know for sure. The only people that know that for sure are the owners of those weapons and when they weren't seized. Don't forget that there's a whole. It's interesting because there is 11 other people that were arrested that night from those other trailers. Okay. And they have gun charges as well. Okay. So they're not even telling the whole story here at all about who was involved, and I mean, I know why. I'll tell you why.
It's a very hard part of the story to learn about. I tried. But you know how hard it was to figure out the other? They don't want to talk about it, of course.
Well, of course not. And the CBC is sort of following a little bit of a line here because none of the other people have been to trial yet. And this is all still pre-trial shit that they technically aren't allowed to talk about. So they leave that part out, but it's very, so again, they're trying to make a documentary of a story that hasn't even finished yet. It's not over.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay,
so that makes it challenging for them, but no excuses. Fuck them.
Under arrest and without a shot fired, all charged with conspiracy to murder police officers.
It took to the point where we knew what was about to happen or inevitably to happen, and we acted as soon as we could.
When the RCMP did make me aware that there was possibly individuals that had ulterior motives, that was very concerning to me. We were there peacefully. I had addressed the protesters at one point and said, if you have any paraphernalia in your trucks, and I didn't even specifically mention guns, I says, get it off the highway. This is not why we're here.
The dangerous criminal activity occurring away from the TV cameras and social media posts was real and organized.
The federal government would tell the public what happened at Coutts was serious enough to help justify invoking the Emergencies Act for the first time. The police now had unprecedented power to forcefully shut down the protests.
For the first time?
Group.
Hang on one second. Okay, couple things here. Number one, all three men were arrested on the 13th. So what you saw, including Chris Carbert, okay, when they were under arrest and taken away, they were arrested for mischief only. They did not have conspiracy to commit murder or possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose until late in the afternoon on February 14th.
Where might makes right.
But building a case that would stand up in court wasn't going to be easy. Coming up, The RCMP interrogate the accused.
It's not what you guys think of it being this militia group or some terrorist organization. That's what the government and the media is going to spin it as, like they have.
On that cold February night, the RCMP took 14 people into custody. But at the detachment in southern Alberta, their focus...
No, they didn't. They didn't take 14 people into custody that night. Absolutely, they did not. Again, they want you to make... There's some problems for them. This is why they knew it was going to be hard for them to make a case, because here was the thing. They were reverse engineering it. That's the problem. So there weren't 14 people arrested on the 13th of February, okay? There was 11 people arrested, okay? Jerry was arrested around 10:30, 11 a.m. the next day on his way to work. I was the 13th person arrested when I got to the High River Police Detachment, where they had taken Jerry to find out what the hell was going on. Okay, so there's always been this narrative that, they had these 4 men together and they were, all arrested together. No. Jerry was arrested hours away after he had already left the protest the day before. So again,
that's a great correction. It's a factual inaccuracy.
It is a factual inaccuracy.
I stamped it. Thank you. That's a good one to point out.
Officers.
I just want to see my mom and my cat. Oh boy, it's not good.
Officers needed the men to open up, so they had to gain their trust. Before the interview began, an investigator explained his technique for the recording.
But just because I say something in this room about my views, does not necessarily mean that those are my views. And definitely does not mean that they are the views of the RCMP or represent the RCMP.
Bottom line, we have the right to protest peacefully, right?
Yeah, and that's what we're doing.
Never talk to cops. Never talk to faggot fucking cops that are still wearing fucking masks. Fucking faggots. Fuck you.
We want to break the middle class, Andy. And
especially cops you can't identify because their masks are on. Like, could we pick any of these cops out of a crowd again? No, we don't know what they look like.
You are in the middle class, I am in the middle class, everybody in this room, building everywhere is the middle class. And when the elites win, we all lose. And we'll all be in a concentration camp then, just like it was in Germany.
The Fifth Estate obtained more than 13 hours of footage. It has never been broadcast before, and shows the police interrogating Tony Olienick, Chris Carbert, and Chris Lysak.
Yeah, I just want to be with my son.
This is a man going through chemical withdrawal, FYI, the crying. Just understand that.
The men were denied bail, and each court appearance became a rally of support as police looked on.
I don't believe that we are the fringe minority. I think that the rest of them are the fringe minority.
Many insisted the men were wrongfully accused, heroes, even political prisoners.
If your child was in jail for 1.5 years, having been convicted of nothing, how would you feel about it?
This was not just a small band of ragtag criminals.
Temitope Oriola is a criminologist at the
Right, there were no criminals involved, actually. Nobody with any history of criminal activity at all. So I would agree with that there, Mr. Whoever the hell you are.
Intrinsic belief that, it cannot be that dangerous. They cannot pose much of a threat because they are us. They are a mirror image of mainstream society.
And in the years since the men's incarceration, Oriola has kept tabs on the expanding support networks across Alberta.
They had.
Meaning we're all on a government watch list. This is the guy that's surveilling us, FYI, just so everybody understands. This man is stalking us.
I've watched this probably more times than anybody on earth. I know about making documentaries. This guy, and I got this phrase from you, Jacqueline, and I really appreciate it. This guy is kook bait. This guy, the way that they're presenting him because you can do very interesting things with documentaries. The way that they're framing him, the way that he sits awkwardly, the way that he pushes up his glasses, the way that they zoom in on his face when he's being extra arrogant. This guy is the antagonist of the entire documentary. He is made to make you lose your mind. This is what makes the documentary a hallucinogenic fever dream versus an informational documentary. It's a production, and it's meant to drive you crazy.
Thank you. Good point, Alex.
I would assume that he would be the boss guy to any agitators possibly that might have shown up in order to mess with us during the process, right? We kept tabs on this support system.
Well, I looked into this. I looked into this fella. He knows nothing about the case. He knows absolutely nothing.
He doesn't need to. He's not.
He
that's
wrote
not
one
his job.
article. He
That's
wrote
not
one
his
article
job.
in February of 2022, and it was about how the Coutts people were treated too fairly because they were white. Now, if you know anything about...
I'll say it. This guy is a DEI hire, one of the chosen to be elevated, who is, gifted accolades and awards and, launched his career here being a propagandist.
Totally.
And they want us to just like ream on this guy as much as humanly possible so that they can claim victimhood, I think. It seems like a psyop. Anyway, I know that phrase is thrown around too often.
It is a psyop. I got the receipts. The DEI psyop is a thing.
Yeah.
It is. But anyway, don't buy the kook bait.
And the government constantly monitors us in order to curate their propaganda, to steer us into the direction that they want to go, which is a psyop in itself. It's never ending in this country because we are not a free nation. Keep going.
But, Marco, God bless him, he bought the kook bait. When I watched this on the show that shall not be named, immediately he was like, deport. Which is funny, right? But that's what they want. So don't.
Right.
Yeah, let's.
I think we're allowed to get angry though when we see it.
Yeah. But they're trying to.
I don't care what package he comes in. It's his intent that bothers me. That's the problem. It's his character and what he's doing here that bothers me.
But I think there's an even more insidious intent. They're presenting this guy as, somebody who is the DEI guy. They want to make him the antagonist to like drive all of us completely crazy. And I'm not buying it.
Nationalities that were far-flung from what the average protester there might have found. Yes, there were folks in society who didn't like the vaccination mandate, who were anti-government beliefs and all of that. But I think the average member of the public would draw a line once you start gathering firearms to take on the police.
At Smuggler's Saloon, protesters hung a Canadian flag. The men signed their names along with others at the blockade.
It's kind of like kissing the Blarney Stone, I guess. You're there, you got to sign the flag. I didn't.
Even months later, owner Roger Vilcarsis questioned the arrests. So from your perspective, the arrests were not because of a public safety threat. They were because of what?
Political. They wanted to shut this down. Somebody wants you locked up or trumped up charged, they can do it.
The RCMP released very little information in the aftermath of the arrest, but they did publicize this photo and said it showed what they pulled from the trailers and a home they raided in Coutts. 13 long guns, handguns, tactical gear, ammunition, and more.
Well, how do you convince them that what you're saying is true?
The truth is that this absolutely took place, and I'm not going to argue with somebody who isn't going to listen to the facts.
But that wasn't enough to convince some supporters. Vilcarsis believed police faked the bust.
She watched, so this is first-hand news, them plan.
Can we get a fact check on okay, this photo...
I'm not going to listen to anyone who doesn't want to listen to the facts, she says, as we're talking about the guns. Right. If you're interested in the facts, and you're a good journalist, wouldn't you be asking factual questions like, who owns these guns?
Right.
How did they get there?
Where did they come from? Who owned them? Were they legally owned? What's the context? There's like so many details about this photo that were just completely left off the table in every single news article, every single website, It was just scary guns. This was like the most perfect propaganda photo, especially for a country like Canada, which is now mostly urban, mostly people living in cities that have no connection to gun culture, no connection to life in rural areas, none of that. They just see guns. And again, I've said this a million times, the CBC has a decades-long track record of comparing Canada to the United States. Oh, those Americans and their Second Amendment and their guns and their gun crime, and the Americans are crazy and we're not like that. This photograph was the perfect propaganda tool, and the fact that almost nobody investigated that photo and the questions that arose from it in the media.
I tried.
I'm just saying, but like, are you mainstream media? This is what I'm saying.
No,
and don't forget too that they wanted to paint a narrative here of a militia. So they arrested 13 people and 13 guns. Those guns don't belong to the 13 people. 4 people didn't have nothing to do with guns. Actually, have already been, I have nothing to do with guns. None of these guns are mine. I'm not a gun owner, right? But 13 guns and 13 people to present a picture of a militia that doesn't exist.
And just to go full circle, like I said from the very beginning, this is a video version of the article they published February 14th, 2022. Nothing materially differs here. They know that this wasn't brought into the trial. So if they are saying that this documentary would have hurt these men's ability to receive a fair trial prior to the trial, then they're acknowledging that the February 14th, 2022 article did exactly the same thing, because nothing changes materially here.
That's right.
Plant guns.
She says that they planted guns?
She watched it.
Yeah. The woman he's talking about is named Joanne Person. Olienick, Lysak, and Carbert were staying in a trailer on her property. Carbert was arrested there, and that's where police seized many of the guns. Hi, Joanne. Hi, I'm Steven. I'm with
Not
the
interested.
Fifth
Media's already told enough lies about me. I don't need any more garbage out there about me.
You know, we're hoping to hear your side, because we know a lot of folks in town say that this was set up by the RCMP, and we know you were here.
We are hoping to hear your side. Oh, the CBC would like to hear your side now. Well. I have personally complained to the CBC ombudsman about their shows not hearing our side of the story. Yeah, they tried to contact Jacqueline and the rest of them for this Fifth Estate thing, right? There's been all kinds of other people who would have been willing to talk to them to present their side of the story. Oh no. No. We have to do it unannounced, knocking on your door with a camera rolling, when you could have had me, could have had you, could have had there's a small handful of people that have been telling this story that you could have talked to. Isn't it interesting? I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I have written for Newsweek, a major American magazine. I had the guys call me from jail so I could tell their story. How is it the CBC didn't bother talking to me? Or you, Alex, or Buck, or anybody else? No, let's just roll.
They didn't reach out. They didn't reach out to Levine either.
No,
Thank God.
All right. Well, anyway,
Oh no! I mean, the first time I saw this, I was watching it with Marco, and I said, Marco, why weren't you smart like Miss Person? Why did you?
Well, yeah. Well, again, these fuckers.
I don't blame her for 1 second for not talking to them.
These people
if they had reached out to us, would you have said yes?
That one. What was that one radio show? The criminal one where they interviewed Cleveland? Yeah. I probably would have went on Front Burner and tore them a new asshole for all of the lying and things they did wrong. They might not have run it, but at least we could give them credit for attempting to do the best that they could to speak with people on the defense side of this case. No.
Well, in Marco's defense, he did an hour-and-a-half interview with them. They only showed 30 seconds and whatever fit their narrative. They would have done the same thing with Miss Person.
Yeah. So
look, if they're gonna misrepresent court records, then they're gonna misrepresent whatever you tell them.
Yeah, the only additional, we just had to spend a lot more time here correcting the context of our participation. Would have been an additional thing on top of everything else to do here. And we would have looked like fools for participating in our own slander, as a matter of fact.
That's right.
So,
Which is how Marco rightly feels. I mean, I kind of get it too. I think that like part of
Marco
being a
has
good
never
person
missed
is,
an opportunity to talk to the press about this since it all
Yeah.
happened. He's the mouthpiece for the press for the entire thing. He's never
I
turned
like
down a single
Marco.
interview. So,
I mean,
I don't think
love him
there's,
a lot,
he knows exactly what he's engaging in. So, I mean, it's been the same all along, right? Like,
yeah.
Alex,
Yeah.
are you aware that Marco fingered Chris Lysak at his arrest, and that was live streamed?
Well, he gave him the middle finger.
No, like, in other words, brought the RCMP and pointed out Lysak. I'm sorry, I guess that I didn't use that.
That's outrageous. He's such a nice guy. All right. Well, I don't want to get too far into the weeds there. I will continue, guys, or
Yeah, keep going.
okay.
Inside the interview room, the men continued to insist they were run-of-the-mill protesters.
What about Chris Carbert? Good dad, single dad, custody of the son?
Not a dangerous guy.
That I know. He's great. He's been a really good friend.
And Jerry?
Really good.
Yeah. Same day as Guns, God's Freedom, like.
Well, I met Big Chris at the gun shop.
Where do you guys usually shoot?
Oh, we have a couple places.
One of those places was this gun shop in Lethbridge. The owner declined to speak to us, but sent us to another store nearby. It's owned by Ted Feller.
I've known the one Chris for many, many, many years when he was just actually a youngster growing up. In fact, I did take him out hunting at one time.
A picture of a young Chris Lysak hangs on Feller's wall. He says he didn't believe the charges when he first heard them.
Bought his licenses, bought his ammunition, and never, ever bought anything out of the ordinary that I thought, what the hell is he up to? The other firearm that I did see him in there is what we would call an SKS.
He heard the rumor that the RCMP planted guns and says he can dispute it.
And I looked at the photoreal gun, I go, oh, I recognize that. Might even have sold him that.
Firearms of all kinds. And body armors and so machetes. Those are not typical items that any lawful, peaceful protester would take to the site of a protest.
Did you have any guns?
I had non-restricted 12-gauge there.
Okay, and where was that?
In the trailer.
So you didn't have a gun on you?
No.
You arrested?
Nothing.
So you just literally had a gun there.
At the trailer. In my home, where I was staying. So, to defend myself.
Chris Carbert owned the trailer where some of the guns were seized.
2 mags with 223 rounds, 1 long mag with 223 body armor, 2 mags from armor, loose ammo from a backpack, another rifle.
So I can guarantee you this all wasn't in my trailer. There's no way.
Are there any guns listed here that are yours? Is there anything in here that's yours? No? You're shaking your head, so does that mean no? Or?
Yes, right there. I'm not gonna answer.
Okay, all right.
At that time, Carbert was banned from owning firearms due to a past run-in with the law.
What?
Yeah, that's not true. I've confirmed I've confirmed with everyone that's not true. That's factually inaccurate.
Exactly. And also, I think it's important for people throughout the country that don't understand that, sure, it's by province as to what the legalities are around body armor. In Alberta, you only need a PAL to purchase it, and it's fully legal to own it. So
why would it ever be illegal to own body armor anyway?
It is in some provinces. No, it is. They pick and choose. It isn't prohibited, but in Alberta, it isn't. You need a PAL and you can purchase it. So again, they use and just like that fire, like look at the guy that owned the store. Okay.
I'm pretty sure
I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. He never came in here and bought anything. I wasn't concerned about him. He never gave me any vibes. There was no. So again, wouldn't he be the guy that'd be like, yeah, I mean, quite honestly, there was a lot of ammunition or whatever. Like, no, nothing out of the ordinary at all here. Okay. And just because you see a picture of an SKS in a like a photo, I mean, if you don't know the serial number off it to know if it came from your store, you can't say definitively that that you know that weapon. Like,
yeah, and
they look
also
pretty. They're
your
very
point,
generic, right? In a photo. So
to your earlier point as well, like they're showing Carbert this picture, and I believe it is the infamous guns picture. I believe it's the 13 guns picture, and they're saying, we found this, we found this, we found this. And he's saying, there's no way that was in my trailer. He looks nervous when he's saying, but he's probably waiting for his Suboxone or whatever the hell he's waiting for. Like he's in a state of medical distress.
Yes.
But they're not giving context to that.
Now, another fact I'd like to bring up, and maybe Jacqueline can confirm this, but as I recall from the trial, was it 4 or 5 of the firearms featured in that famous photo whose ownership were never accounted for by the time everything went to trial?
Gord, the famous photo never went to trial at all.
We still don't know.
Right.
I have no clue who owns what in that picture at all. Even like it's never really been defined. Apparently Chris Carbert does take ownership. I have no clue what they are. No idea.
The infamous gun picture never made it to the final trial. That was never a piece of evidence in the trial.
Right. So another thing that was like not a part of the trial, and I'm sure this documentary is going to get to it if I see they haven't already, was the whole Diagolon thing.
Oh, yes.
Right. So there's the little patches on the one vest, the homemade Diagolon patches, which everyone freaked out about to, connect these guys to those freaks. They were also a non-entity in trial, I believe, except for one photo that noted the patches, but like that was it. It never went past that.
No.
Honestly, like the second half of this documentary, I know we're moving at a snail's pace through the first half, but the second half is just all about Diagolon, and like we could breeze through it. It's a laugh, but it's not really a laugh for us because we know how much harm this is all done. Like, I'd almost be cool just like not even watching the Diagolon portion and maybe like just give it. It's irrelevant. It's ridiculous. Okay, I'll keep going, and if you guys agree,
keep rolling, bro.
I just don't even want to publicize that nonsense, but let's go.
I actually, you know what? Just before that, again, I think the reason why certain things never made it to the trial is because they were knocked out in pre-trial. So again, the warrants were tested. It was agreed that they were garbage. They unlawfully seized the guns. They had no warrant for the guns. Okay. Now, the only reason why the guns were still allowed to be used against Chris and Tony is because of the conspiracy tag. Okay. So in a conspiracy, what can be used against one can be used against all. Now, just wait, Alex. No, wait. Just wait. So the Crowns, their very tactical way that they made sure that they would still be able to talk about guns within the trial was to plea Lysick and Jerry out before those warrants were contested, okay? Because without them contesting their charter breaches of these warrants, they could still utilize the evidence against the other two men. So they had two men that instead of their lawyers doing their goddamn jobs for especially the insane amount of money that they were paid to do it, they chose to help the Crown by having their clients plea out to ridiculous charges. And even Lysick, let's be honest, okay, whether we agree with it or not, without a gun being able to be used against you, you don't have a charge of unlawful storage, okay?
Oh, absolutely.
He could have walked with no charges at all whatsoever and no gun ban whatsoever, had his lawyer just done his job contesting the heavily weighted warrants of the wiretaps and the search warrants. But they chose not to, in order to set the Crown up to have evidence to use that is unlawful and ridiculous against two other men who fought and won those warrants. They won theirs.
So everything that you just said right there is content for an entire book. And what you're about to see in the next 5 minutes here or so is them explain it in half a second. They're just going to say, 2 men pled to lesser deals, and then they're just going to move right on. It's outrageous. So take a breath.
Meanwhile, the RCMP were gearing up to raid Olienick's home. On his property, they would find, built into the hillside, the entrance to a bunker.
Is there anything dangerous at your house?
I don't know.
Any explosives? Anything that could be explosive?
Cold storage is what that bunker is, FYI. It's got potatoes in it, from my understanding.
It's a fruit cellar that his father built 25 years ago.
Yeah.
The bunker was the moment that I completely lost my mind over this. The bunker, they made it look like it's a Taliban terrorist encampment in a side of a hill. Like the music and like the scream music, you know, the horror, unbelievable.
Well, and they also painted these pictures they used the term foxholes too at some point, which was also just core sampling that had been done, you know, in various spots throughout the gravel, because that whole property is a gravel quarry. Okay. It's covered up with grass, but there's gravel everywhere. Okay. And sand. And that's what their business was. And so they definitely did core sampling here and there throughout the
course, yeah,
to find out what they could aggregate from those areas. And they called them foxholes, even though they were just core sampling sites. So FYI, you need to know this stuff.
Gord, did you see the bunker?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the whole explosives thing, which has been so thoroughly debunked, and they just kept going with it, and to no logic other than, you know, just prosecutorial overcharging. They're seeding it here.
Well, the bunker, the reason that it made me lose my mind was in a good way, because I was like, this is a gift. Again, this is not something that came up in trial. This is CBC is responsible for this alone. Nobody told them this. To do this, they flew a drone over and made the assumption that there's a bunker.
No, actually, this came from ITOs. So yes, they got this from police inflammatory horseshit, and this is what they choose to elevate rather than the truth.
So there's two parties responsible. Regardless, it's a horrific thing that they just did, and it deserves to be exposed. Okay, sorry guys.
On his property, they would find, built into the hillside, the entrance to a bunker.
Is there anything dangerous at your house?
I don't know.
Any explosive? Anything that could be explosive?
Oh, yeah.
Coming up, the RCMP uncovered the conspiracies fueling these men's fear.
I'm probably too deep down the rabbit hole, but it scares me, right? Just from seeing all these elites doing what they're doing and stuff.
After the arrests in Coutts, police moved quickly to gather evidence. The investigation brought them to Tony Olienick's property outside Claire's home. Olienick and the others had gathered here in the months leading up to the convoy.
We've been doing it since COVID started.
Not true. First time I was ever at Tony's house was on February the 9th when we picked up socks and underwear. First time Jerry's ever been there either. So that's a false statement. We didn't know. We didn't know.
That's materialistic, and according to the courts, that's materially incorrect because he said Tony and the others.
Right. Which is
Carbert went there for 3 sessions of their survivalist sessions on Sunday, which sounded very cute and funny. But Lysak wasn't there, and Morin wasn't there. So others is plural. So that's another factual inaccuracy.
Exactly.
To build a community, because we don't know the outcome of what's going to happen with the collapse of the system in the society. So it's like we need to look after each other.
That's noble.
And we got to defend each other.
Yeah.
When police rolled in, they found stockpiles of supplies, gas masks, and tactical gear, guns in the bedroom, in a truck, and a gun case. In this wooden box, 2 pipe bombs. And scattered across the property, more than 36,000 rounds of ammunition.
36,000 rounds is an astronomical amount of ammunition.
200 kilometers away from the protest.
And also that a warrant was obtained after they found illegally guns, right? So the preface that they illegally obtained guns. They had no idea if guns were there or not. They didn't get a warrant for guns. They went in and found guns, seized them, immediately created a propaganda photo, and then went to the courts citing that information in order to get search warrants on the properties. So everything from that first warrant technically is illegal, because everything from the premise of that original one for documents and data, which was a false warrant, period.
And all of that aside, having spoke to Tony's mother, like, I'm not going to tell anybody how to do their job, but I think one thing I really regret is that she did not take the stand on his behalf, because everything that she described to me about this situation checked out. She described those bins. His father died, and he was in a place of grieving, so he just shoved all of his belongings into Tupperware. And his dad was crazy. His dad had lots of guns and lots of ammo and explosives.
Owning lots of guns and owning lots of ammo is not illegal.
Right. It wasn't illegal, exactly.
There is no ceiling on how much ammunition you can have. And every time some politician like Justin Trudeau or Barack Obama or whoever comes along and says, we are going to introduce new gun control legislation, what happens? Gun sales go up, ammo sales go up. You can track this. It's recorded in the media. There are interviews with people who own gun stores that will tell you that every time some idiot like Trudeau or Obama opens their mouth about gun control, the very next day their sales go through the roof because people stockpile it. It's their right to. It is not illegal to stockpile ammunition. This is not, there's nothing here.
So I looked this up just to see if there's any sort of storage or licensure requirements. And I think it's 220 kilograms of ammunition is when you need to obtain a explosives license and store it in a specific fashion. And so I forget what I looked at, maybe like I forget what type of round, but my calculation, depending on what was there, a bunch of 22. I mean, we're talking not even half. If all of that ammo was at one location, it's still not even half that the amount.
This wasn't even Tony's stuff in terms of it being his stuff. He was just in possession of it. And I understand that possession is 9/10 of the law, but this actually became a very contentious issue with the jury, and they had to go back to the judge several times on, do you have to have knowledge of something to have possession of it? For instance, like if I invite somebody, if I give somebody a ride home, from work, and they leave a gun in my car, and then I get caught with that gun, am I really in possession of it if I don't have knowledge of it? And I think it's reasonable, if you actually know the details of the story, to assume that Tony did not have any knowledge of these explosives.
There's two thresholds: knowledge and control.
Exactly.
So, and the issue here is that these are not pipe bombs. They're literally called firecrackers. Yep. There was plenty of testimony done by people that worked with Tony as well as his dad.
You were there for that, I think.
Over the course of the trial to explain what they were used for, which again, I think I just mentioned with the foxholes. These are quarry sampling, or when you're drilling, and you get, especially in sandstone tends to gum up drills. So drills get stuck. And drills are expensive. So you don't just leave your drill. So these little firecrackers are used as just a small, tiny little blast that's not going to hurt your drill, but is going to break apart the sandstone so you can pull your drill out. And that was, there was witnesses that came forward and testified that they'd watched Tony and his dad utilize those specifically for that instance. And that's what those were. The problem was the technicality, okay? The technicality is that, yes, you can use these and they're totally legal, and that's exactly what they're for, but you have to have a valid permit all the time if you have them. And these were old, stored from his dad's stuff from a decade ago. That he didn't even remember were there. So of course there's no I bet you if you really look through his records, you could find permit to go with those two freaking firecrackers from the time when he put them together, but not for today, when they were found, unfortunately, honestly, the jury got stuck on a technicality of permitting is what really went down there.
Exactly. And they're totally forgetting the human circumstance. Like Tony didn't exactly have a conventional childhood. He had a dad who loved guns and explosives, which actually is fairly conventional by Alberta standards, maybe not Canadian standards. But and then he just threw all this stuff into bins.
But it was their business it was tools.
It was their business. It was their business. Yeah. So anyway, where I'm going with this is when they interviewed him, when they interrogated him, and they were like, "Is there any explosives on your property?" You can see at that moment he's like, "Holy shit! Like I'm just stuck in this weird situation where there probably are explosives on my property. They're not mine."
And also, Tony provided multiple permittings and county reports from where he'd actually, where when he's in this business and he is using them, that he does get the permiting and he could be proved history of getting the appropriate permits from the county to use. So again, it's ridiculous. It was a technicality for the fact that they were still in existence without a permit attached directly to it, which is where the jury got caught up.
People who don't see our side of the story have completely lost any sense of intent.
Yeah.
If I have a device for the purpose of quarrying and I don't like the Prime Minister, it doesn't mean that I intend to use this explosive device to blow him up.
Right.
And as it relates to the protest itself, to this conspiracy in Coutts, all of George Olienick, rest in peace. Remember, Tony's father is no longer with us.
Right.
Whether or not they're George's or Tony's is irrelevant to Coutts because 200 fucking kilometers away. If you're intending to use this stuff against cops at a protest, you cannot have them 200 kilometers away out of arm's reach.
Exactly. If I was preparing for war, why would all of my weapons and ammunitions be a 4.5 hour drive away in the snow?
Right.
Carry on, sir.
Yeah.
That's the preppers holding off the army coming their way. To stockpile that much ammunition is highly concerning. That's a lot of ammunition.
Criminologist Kelly Sundberg reviewed the police investigation. He's a former law enforcement officer and a gun enthusiast who shoots on ranges in rural Alberta.
It's concerning.
These groups, part of their narrative growing from the online conspiracies is this belief in the Civil War and that this collapse of society as we know it. This is why we see the stockpiling of arms, the survivalist, the bunkers, and the
preppers.
The preppers, yeah.
Why don't you stop fucking stockpiling donuts in your fucking gob, you fat cunt?
No. This is a great point. There's nothing illegal about being a prepper. And when we talk about preppers, if you were there, the church thing was ridiculous. So in the trial, for a few weeks prior to them being arrested, Tony was doing this thing every Sunday. It's absolutely adorable, where they would teach people survivalist skills. They'd smoke pot and drink and learn survivalist skills. They had people teaching people how to can, how to sew clothes together. Obviously, Jerry wasn't there. Jerry had no idea who these people were at that time. But we heard about this in trial, and Carbert was there twice, and it was apparently it was the funnest time ever. What is wrong with prepping? There's nothing illegal about prepping. What is this? How is this relevant? Is my question.
But again, this is just an opportunity, though, to paint the self-sustaining person, the non-government crutching citizen in a bad light. They're just taking an opportunity here to continue furthering their agenda as painting anyone who has the ability to exist without the help of the state or, in despite of the state even, as being a problem.
But does it not seem odd that they're not making any point to mention that these four people don't know each other?
Well, of course, that doesn't work with their conspiracy agenda, though, does it, Alex?
But this is it's not informational. This is not misinformation because they claim to have access to the trial. So they should know, but this is disinformation.
Well, They didn't, but they didn't attend the trial. Like, especially what they really didn't want to attend was the pre-trial, because the pre-trial was where all of the shit was tested. And, you know, the cops had to come good for, did you even follow your standard operating procedures? Which we found out that they didn't.
They did not, no. Why aren't they reporting? Like, it's just, this is the video version of the February 14th, 2020.
And again, this is what I find interesting. Why is this a third-hand regurgitation from a retired cop and not the freaking cops that handled this speaking for themselves? Why aren't they speaking for themselves here?
They didn't want to talk to the CBC either.
Well, they don't want, you know why? Because they'd have to take accountability, unfortunately. Right?
No, they don't trust them. They don't trust them. I mean, the CBC comes out worse here than the cops, in my opinion. This is horrific.
Well, but here's not really, because everything that the CBC gets comes from the cops initially. It was their job to attend court while the rest of us did to test the garbage and hold it to scrutiny.
Well, actually, you're gonna see something in a second here that will surprise you.
All right, let's play it up then.
Okay.
Police found a journal, notes going back to the start of the pandemic, a window into Olienick's mind. In March, COVID-19, end of capitalism. May, government pushing vaccine, hope all the sheep get swept away in God's wrath when the time comes. And then by August, he's working on that bunker. On December 28th, Olienick writes the rapture is coming, a 1,000-day war against Satan or the Antichrist. God will see my efforts and sacrifice and grant me into heaven.
None of this is new. These things have been around for a while. It is now popularly called Christian nationalism. All of us Christians would be embarrassed by what these groups stand for.
And in late January 1776, convoy to Coutts, a reference to the American Revolution.
The idea that the
All right. I see we're getting into the Canadian Anti-Hate Network here, and I see what they're doing by taking all this stuff out of Tony's notes. And I want people...
It does sound just like him, though, doesn't it?
Well, okay, but again... The point
I love Tony.
I know, so do I.
That's how he talks.
The point is not whether you agree with Tony or his writings or not. The point is that when you zoom out and look at the entire prosecution and the fantasy that Johnston concocted about this conspiracy, which we have to repeat, they were found not guilty of, it is based almost completely on Tony's words. These guys were being convicted for wrongthink. The CBC is trying to relitigate this case by convicting them of wrongthink. Ooh, Christian nationalists. Ooh,
there you go. That's the term, Gord.
This is
Christian nationalists. Because again, I think that the CBC, I hate to think like a lawyer, but I think by using that term, they really screwed up. Because in Canada, political belief is not a protected class, but religious belief is.
Well, lots of things aren't protected anymore because the Charter of Rights and Freedoms,
nothing's protected.
Just like the Constitution in the United States has been flushed down the toilet, having been used as shit wipe a long time ago. But I get what you're saying, but I just want people listening to this to understand. This is about wrongthink. They use the guns as a pretext. Oh, they're gonna overthrow the government. They're gonna attack the cops. They're gonna do all this stuff. That's not what this is about. They do not want you to think for yourself. They do not want you to have your own beliefs. You must be part of the Borg, right?
Apparently God rubs them the wrong way too, quite honestly. Which we know that, God does challenge a monarch, doesn't it? Like a monarch wants to be God and professes to be God on earth, you know, the representation to rule over the people.
Well,
That's
there's
a big challenge to the power, isn't it? So it's like,
there's also
do people
this
trust God
suggestion-
more than they trust government? Now that's obviously a direct threat to our authority and our power. So we better put a war on God here too, right? Like,
Well, there's also this suggestion that these four guys not only are a cohesive group, but that they have a cohesive thinking, like that they're all quote unquote Christian nationalists.
Jerry's not a Christian.
I guarantee you, if we got Jerry, the two Chris's, and Tony together, and we said, "Are you guys Christian nationalists?" They would all go, "What the hell is that?"
Right.
But I'll tell you why. It's because of the IMVE and the RMVE frameworks.
Yes.
Like they are trying to create precedent for these domestic terrorist designations that allow them to weaponize the national security infrastructure against political dissident.
Yeah. They already had the framework. They were trying to fit the men into their category. Okay.
Exactly.
The framework's been there for a really long time. They had to put them into the mold.
They had leaked this information to the press through that government toady, Justin Ling, that January is 27th or something, that the convoy was going to be infiltrated by ideologically motivated violent extremists and RMVE, right? And so they had to validate that through things like the Nazi flag flown, you know, hundreds of meters away from the convoy in the hotel where the RCMP is staying, right? And they had to, you know, and all of this information came from two places: open source from Canadian Anti-Hate and the FBI.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's go.
The United States was basically born in blood, born out of a revolution, and that this would be our, you know, maybe a precursor to our 1776.
I read and I more than I should, right? And I'm probably too deep down the rabbit hole, but it scares me, right? Just from seeing all these elites doing what they're doing and stuff. I think they're evil. I just do.
All I talk about, which is not surprising, becomes part of their worldview, right?
Kurt Phillips has been investigating extremism.
Okay, but at the time, it was our whole fucking life was dominated by COVID goddamn terrorism, for Christ's sakes. This is 2024 with a man still in jail, and you're critiquing him based on something that took place
This is
3 fucking years ago.
No, Jacqueline, this interview, this is what I was talking to you about on the phone earlier, is from 2022. Like, no, sorry, the interview with Phillips is from 2022. How is he watching that interrogation video?
That's a good question.
So hold on a minute.
From 2022, that doesn't make sense.
Well, this is why I've done the access to information
And
request.
from what we do
I want to
know-
know, because that would be a privacy breach. He has no right to see that. He's not law
But also,
enforcement.
too,
He's
I
not
think it's
government.
important to point out that Kurt Phillips is a direct, like, combative openly on the internet with Jeremy McKenzie. Jeremy McKenzie is a direct enemy, or they're direct enemies of each other. So for him to think, just a sec, though. For him, so this is where he's going. He's like, oh, I've got one of Mackenzie's boys here, and I've got an opportunity to disparage, which is like, is there any connection between Chris Carbert and Diagolon at all?
There is. Yeah. He had an account. Like, there was Carbert and Lysak. Lysak loved Diagolon. He was a Diagolon fanboy or whatever,
we know
as far as
that.
I understand it. And
Yeah.
Carbert had an account there for like a little bit and like had said a few things. Nothing I
Listening to a podcast is not illegal.
It's not illegal, exactly. Right. And Tony and Jerry, to the best of my knowledge, and I think you'd agree with me, Jacqueline, had never even heard of Diagolon until
I can't speak
after
for
they were
Tony. I don't
arrested.
know anything about what Tony knew or didn't know, but Jerry has, I mean, even if you asked him today, he still doesn't know what the fuck it is.
Tony couldn't lie if he wanted to. And he's like, I had no idea what Diagolon was until like months, like I believe it was after.
Right. We've never heard of it, or Jerry never heard of it until I told him about it. And I never heard about it until my friends actually were text messaging me saying, what is this thing that they keep associating you guys with in the news? And I was like, I don't know. What are you talking about? I have no clue.
I think most people still haven't heard of it.
No, it was being marketed, honestly, at that time by the government more than
And it
anything
still
else.
is being marketed.
Yes.
But nobody's buying this. Like, what is this? What is
Right.
this?
Right. But I just think it's important to note that based on, monitoring them to find out who the hell they actually are and interacting with them to a small degree myself through the process afterwards, I know for sure that Kurt Phillips is an arch enemy of Diagolon, FYI. So interesting that he's, brought into this to give commentary on people that, and Diagolon has nothing to do with Coutts. So
I very much do believe, and it's interesting too, because you can see his screen, and I'll try to get a sharper resolution on the date, because I'd love to know when he was, because he's sitting in his home on his personal laptop watching this interrogation. So if this was in 2022, there is absolutely no reason that he should have access to that footage.
Well,
that
and
would
let's
be a
not
privacy.
forget that Tony had a situation during pre-trial where his disclosure information was mishandled internally by the corrections and ended up in the hands of an inmate in Fairview out of nowhere, while an NDP associated podcaster, Nate, Pike, had submitted an affidavit to the court stating that he was in personal possession through an anonymous sender of email of Tony's personal and privately confidential disclosure. So this was all before the trial, while Tony was being carted around in between different facilities. So so his disclosure disappeared at some point and then resurfaced in Fairview, a facility he'd never attended. And in between that point, a leftist podcaster ended up in possession of confidential documents from that disclosure. Just putting that out there as well.
And again, as you would know, being present for the bail hearings and for the pre-trial, none of this stuff, this Canadian Anti-Hate Network stuff, passed muster to be legal proceeding.
No.
So why is it in this documentary?
It was part of the media narrative. Let's be honest.
It is, exactly, but they haven't changed the narrative. They haven't changed the narrative.
Right, but there's what could be presented in the court of law, and there's what could be presented in the media as propaganda, and they use all of it.
Exactly. Now, that would have been fine 3 years ago, where you have plausible deniability. Well, we didn't know any better. We were too close to the events themselves. Who could know? Like, we're not omnipotent, but now they have access to the trial. They have access to everything that happened. There is no longer plausible deniability for presenting this narrative.
No.
They have no right to, anyway, okay, sorry.
An Anti-Hate Network.
The focuses on distrust and fear of government. Ultimately, that there will be some sort of civil conflict. Many of them seem to look at the events at Coutts as kind of a precursor to that civil war.
This trucker movement is all about freedom in God. Mm-hmm. And the evil elites is all the satanic realm. And I mean, if you really dig deep into these conspiracies, these elites, that's, the whole pedophile scandal that's going on with Epstein and all that. What are they hiding? What? That's why there's so much dark, deep evilness in the system that's controlling it, and they're using all of us as their little pawns in their big game here.
Mm-hmm. The RCMP tried to uncover whether the men had a plan to act on those fears.
There's no conspiring by anybody to do that.
Okay. Is there, I know that, sometimes emotions run high.
Yeah, and sometimes you say stupid things.
Yep.
I'm not telling you everything that we have on wire. We've been listening to you for days and all your buddies. You say to your friend, I am trying to stop it from going to the next level, because from here we go to war. Yeah. So that tells me, Chris, as an investigator looking and putting these pieces of puzzle together, that you knew what was coming down the pipe, but you didn't want it to happen.
Yeah, man, but so that's the whole point of this whole process, is to stop anything from ever getting to that point.
It sounds like you had your hands full there, Chris.
I don't like Trudeau. Yeah, I don't like him. I'd like to see him hang. Sure, that'd be perfect. He needs to be tried for treason and shown all the accountability that he has. And if he's proven guilty, like we know he is, hang him. And get back to how it should be.
Olienick also explained how he thought the protest would ultimately end.
The government then will call the Insurrection Act, because they've already thrown that word out so many times now, haven't they?
Dude, today.
And then guess what? Let me finish this.
That's right. Yeah.
So then what happens is the UN comes, which is Chinese troops. And there is an imminent invasion of Chinese troops on Canadian and American soil.
Do you think the RCMP was equipped to deal with this kind of worldview? Do you think they understood it enough in that moment?
And not just the RCMP, but I think law enforcement and national security intelligence, CBSA, CSIS, the RCMP, I don't think are equipped to deal with the emerging threat that online radicalization
Can we stop here for a second? I just want to throw something in here, which I find interesting. Notice they never played. They have access to, I'm pretty sure, maybe not yet because I haven't been to trial, but they have access to my video interrogation. They could have played that. And I'll tell you why they didn't, because the conversation that I had with the police was, you guys need to start looking in the mirror here to why we even have protests going on, because you've been out here enforcing things that are not law. And if you would just stick to the damn law, then we wouldn't have this back and forth happening, because everything that's being mandated onto us is not law. It's not gone through a legislative process to be able to be enforced by you folks, and you know that. So had you just said no to unlawful orders and made them, make them put it through a legislative process so that it is legal for you to enforce before you do it, we wouldn't be here. So your own culpability in this entire mess is your own fault.
There's a sort of gaslighting by omission going on throughout this entire presentation, right? Like at the beginning, they sort of alluded to lockdowns and COVID, and they mention it a couple of times, but they don't go into the deep dives, hey, there was official medical apartheid in Canada. They just said, if you do not show a vax card, your charter protected rights to travel are gone. No airplanes or trains for you. No leaving the country. That was actually law. And then the premiers are in for it too, like Legault, this fascist in Quebec, that basically made it so that nobody in the province of Quebec could do anything without a vax card. Except, go to the grocery store or the pharmacy. That's it. Right? They literally...
Likewise, they're now going into the interrogation of Tony Olienick, where he says they're going to have Chinese troops on Canadian soil, and we're just not going to mention the fact that we do have open Chinese police stations in Canada.
Right.
And clearly very real issues with election interference and and Chinese spy balloons.
Right.
And the Chinese did train at Petawawa. So it's not that crazy, knowing that they've deployed and trained here.
Right, yeah. So there's all these facts. They're trying to paint, they're conspiracy theorists. They're ideologically motivated. Let's actually dig into the facts of what they're talking about, because this stuff is real.
The strangest thing about this Tony Olienick interrogation video is it's very long. They played it in court, and it did nothing to benefit. It was the Crown that played it. But it benefited him because he made all of these different statements that we all agree that are now true. And he also made some wild predictions about interest rates going up and various things regarding the economy, which is very funny. He was accurate about absolutely everything. Tony's a pretty smart guy. He's a naive guy, but he's very smart.
Alex, check your mic there. You're populating traffic on us. I don't know if you changed something.
Yeah, so I just find it interesting that again, that the police lacked self-awareness in the situation, that they were actually acting unlawfully. They were enforcing things that actually have never gone through a legislative process. Just because Justin Trudeau gets on the TV and declares something does not make it law in Canada, unfortunately. So they were not adhering to their own protocol as far as, And I even said, I feel sorry for you guys, because you put yourselves in a really stupid position where you're the only entity here that can solve this. You guys can solve it by saying
Jacqueline,
no.
Think about this though. You're asking them not to enforce unlawful orders. This is the same RCMP that vandalized private equipment on private property to provoke a violent reaction, and they don't show the clip of Tony, who's literally after getting a phone call from the police, of them confessing to damaging this equipment.
Totally. You're
What does he
absolutely right.
say? We just need to remain peaceful. We cannot react to this. They leave that out.
Yep. And I know my efforts were in vain, but I took the opportunity because I mean, you're sitting there for hours, and they're trying to interrogate with something that you don't even know about. I didn't even know what the hell they were talking about. I was like, what? You know more about this than I do. and
You
you're
still
telling me
don't know what they're
answer
talking. They're still
Right.
talking about hockey bags, and you're
No,
like,
totally.
"What the fuck is going
So
on?"
I just took the opportunity to start interviewing them because I had questions. Actually, I had a lot of questions myself because I had no fucking clue what was going on.
I still have a million questions.
I do, actually.
Me too. I think we all do.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay, let's
keep going. Okay.
Provides a glimpse into our kind of a scary future for us, that if we don't get a handle of online self-radicalization and extremism, people's lives are at risk.
So they're just making a case for Bill C-63 or whatever, C-68, whatever the fuck it's called here. Okay, so never let a crisis go on fucking, wasted here.
Never let a good crisis go to waste.
We recognize that as belonging to the group Diagolon.
Phillips says Diagolon is a uniquely Canadian idea. Started as a joke during the pandemic.
No, it's the Proud Boys with Canadian characteristics.
The diagonal line of sanity through the continent.
Those will be the areas that were conservative, that were traditional, and would respect firearms.
But Phillips says Diagolon grew into a network of online influencers that spread a view that society was headed in the wrong direction and needed to be reset.
The belief that ultimately that they were going to have to take up arms, that there's no political solution. Well, there's no political solution. What does that leave us, right? It leaves a violent solution.
The man behind Diagolon is Jeremy McKenzie.
He's somebody who is incredibly charismatic.
This is outrageous. This is a travesty.
McKenzie gained notoriety for anti-government, anti-vaccine rants. He's a 38-year-old Canadian Forces veteran from Nova Scotia.
In the media, they're calling us, what did they say, a neo-fascist accelerationist, scary word, scary word, scary word, scary word.
Those patches fueled speculation about the network's involvement in Coutts, something its chief influencers denied.
Did the police put them there? I have absolutely no idea.
No, they didn't actually put them there. We now know that Kevin Watson, so he is a Diagoloner that stepped up to help Chris Lysak. He made it clear that he was the one that provided those patches, and he attended the rally, and he's from Calgary. So just that they were not police plants. That's also just want to make. I'll give them credit where it's due, and they did not plant those patches there. Okay.
Right. So I have a question for Jacqueline. I mean, I guess it's just a general statement. So if this Kevin Watson guy and whatever relationship he has to Lysak, if he's some scary Diagolon dude, how did he testify? Was he ever charged with anything?
No.
Right? So they're trying to make again, and like I say, whatever anybody thinks about Diagolon, has Diagolon done anything illegal? Have they been engaged in any violence? No, zero, nothing. Jeremy McKenzie, whatever you think of those charges, I've heard a bunch of different theories about him, but on the record, as far as their world goes, the media and the government in their little universe, McKenzie's clear. He cleared all the charges.
Laser focused.
Right.
Diagolon didn't come up once in court at all.
Right.
Diagolon is not relevant here.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
they
the fact
keep
that
dragging it back.
We can now identify, as Jacqueline just did, and thank you very much, who had the Diagolon patches. They didn't even bring that person in as a witness. It did not pass muster in the court of law. The CBC knows this. Why does it pass muster for the purpose of a documentary?
Because that's why it didn't pass for the court of law. It was because the even though I don't agree, I think that he had some double speak in some of his assertions, but the judge made it very clear that the men could not be prosecuted for their political ideals or ideas or beliefs, period. And so, the reality is that Well, I don't agree with Diagolon. I think they're a bunch of skinhead fucks, FYI, who bamboozled the country. Anti-hate wasn't wrong about them. They're just being marketed now as a problem, and they're honeypot.
They're another type of kook bait.
They are. They're an absolute total kook bait.
You got to give me the mic here for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna read to you the publications of David Hoffman, who hangs with Dr. Barbara Perry and the anti-hate academics that are out there. Let me read these in the year of publication. 2015, Warriors and Prophets, the role of charismatic authority in the radicalization towards violence and strategic operations of terrorist groups. 2017, Charismatic Leadership. 2019, Anti-Authority and Militia Movements in Canada, right? 2020, Confrontational but Not Violent, an assessment of potential violence in anti-authority community in Canada. It reads like a handbook of how you would build this type of movement, and then sure enough, one shows up.
Yeah, I personally think that that they're there to also help to craft the terrible narrative against men that had nothing to fucking do with them at all whatsoever.
Right.
It was it's an assist to the court of public opinion.
Yes.
Which was attempting to tamper with the jury, period.
Right. And what we're seeing here with this documentary, I believe, is the narrative laundering continued, right? So one of the things in Kara Mossad and Elise Hadigan's Hategate thing was like the government goes to the cops and says, we have this report from Canadian Anti-Hate Network. And then they go to Five Eyes and they go to all these different agencies, and it all just goes in a circle because it's a single source, right? And so why do they keep doing this? If we know it's a non-entity, if we know that Diagolon meant nothing in the trial, at all, zero, there's very little connection here. It means nothing. They've done nothing. By the government's own courts and all the stuff they've tried to hang on Mackenzie, he's beat all of it. Why do they keep doing this? I keep coming back to Bill C-63, right?
So here's
they're trying to build public support for Bill C-63 because this is it. They want to be able to control what you say, hear, think, your access to information, and they need to have boogeymen. They cannot let the public be peaceful and just be normal and think everything's okay. There has to be a boogeyman, right? That's why they keep dragging this back forward, even though, like, under the court of law and under the rules, there's nothing to it.
It's more than just Bill C-63. It's 210, to de-anonymize social media. It's Bill C-70 that made gathering on protest, at Parliament Hill, a 10-year indictable offense. It's the FinTrack amendments that happened after the Emergencies Act that they made permanent. So, it covers all of these, crypto and crowdfunding mechanisms under the money laundering. Like, they are building a walled garden around the internet across the NATO. It's like an iron curtain around the NATO countries. And you can see the Hegelian dialectic at work. It even shows up in some of those posts that I've done about, CSIS talking points and documents. They talk about literally how they looked at how the ADL and the FBI, was used to, coordinate and shape public perception around, right-wing radicalization in the United States. It's like a carbon copy of what we saw with the RCMP and Canadian Anti-Hate. The parallels are so stunning. It's remarkable not to notice it.
And I just want to mention, like, most people that I know, including myself, had never heard of Canadian Anti-Hate Network until it was being
Diagolon.
Until it was being pumped heavily by not only the media but then also Diagolon. Actually, I'd never heard of most of the characters, that were supposedly public enemy number one until they were victims of it, right? So it's like there's a lot of interesting parallels here about how these agencies are actually using each other in order to become prevalent.
So on the whole Diagolon thing, I interviewed Donald Best, of all people, like 8 weeks ago, I think it was, and we chatted for a couple hours, and most of it was just unimportant. But like, what was interesting, I thought, was that I felt like he gave me some really valuable insights, and one of them is, what is a Fed? He's like, there is no such thing as just a generic Fed. There are different types of Feds. There are informants. There are plants. There are agents. There are double agents. There are triple agents.
He would know for sure, actually.
Yeah, of course.
Which category is he? Which one of them is he? Is the question too. I'd love to know which one he falls under. I would like to clear that up. And which is Levine too? What's Levine fall under? I'd love to know that.
Hold on. I felt like it was a gift that he explained that to me, because then I started thinking in that framework. And I realized that because I like to deal with facts, I don't like to deal with conjecture. Jeremy McKenzie, admittedly, based off of his POEC testimony, is an informant. He said there were these Boogaloo people in BC. I thought that they might be trying to do something dangerous. I reported them to the RCMP. That's a fact.
And I'll tell you.
Hold on. At the POEC. I also think that Jeremy McKenzie is a plant. Whether that's wittingly or unwittingly is not for me to say. But he is much like the Nazi flag. He is there. He is of great value to the government, and they are leveraging the fact that he is there. Now, whether he knows that or not is besides the point. I can't prove that. But
he fits the bill for useful idiot too. He could just be useful
right,
idiot
exactly,
as well. 100%.
Exactly.
No. Listen,
exactly.
folks. It is by his own words and actions that he outs himself. The night that right after Chris Lysak got arrested, that it was live streamed, Jeremy takes to Telegram, and you can go find this video on my timeline or elsewhere, and you can watch Jeremy McKenzie giggle and laugh and try to hold his composure and delight as he announces that the RCMP, all kitted all up and went and effected arrests. It is a phenomenon called duper's delight. And if you watch that one video alone, you understand, you can see into his mind, because he's, failing to keep the mask. You can see the giddiness and glee with which, he is announcing this news, to his loyal following.
Can I make a quick little sidebar point here? This organization in America was referenced, the Boogaloo Boys. Very famously, the main...
I actually don't really know what the Boogaloos are. I just use it as like a...
The Boogaloo Boys were this like weird libertarian thing where they would like show up at protests wearing Hawaiian shirts, and they would open carry in places that it's legal, and they would just be like, yo, we're allowed to do this, and the government are a bunch of retards. And the main guy from Boogaloo was interviewed. He had like his little 15 minutes of fame on the podcast circuit a few years ago. And the guy was like openly like, gender question. Like he would not commit to being like straight or gay. And he openly was like supported the rainbow flag people. He was very like a left libertarian. So like, when you listen to a guy like McKenzie for as long as many of us have, it makes perfect sense that he would like turn in the Boogaloo Boys, because maybe they're not exactly Jeremy's kind of freedom fighter. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, yeah, and also the idea of being an informant is not such a bad idea. Gord, if somebody were to reach out to you on Substack and say, I'm a really big Gord McGill fan, I'm really upset with the government, and I think I might blow something up, you'd be heavily considering calling the police as well.
That's not what we're talking about. That's such a false equivalency to what Jeremy McKenzie has done. No.
It's not a false equivalency in terms of what he said at the POEC.
Please let me finish.
No. Let's keep it constrained to what we know versus what we don't know. Like when it came to the POEC, and that's what I'm dealing with specifically, is he admitted.
Yeah, but Jeremy was also in a position. He wasn't in a position to really play ball either, was he? He was being incarcerated at the time in Saskatoon. So I mean, all of the elements of save my ass and do whatever it takes were on the table and present. at the time.
And 24 charges across 3 provinces just suddenly being stayed is very unusual.
Weird.
Very strange. Yes. I acknowledge all of that. I'm just saying, though, that if somebody sends me an email and says I'm going to bomb something, I'm calling the police.
Well, do we?
I know snitches get stitches.
Alex,
but
let's
I also,
leaving it to the context of what we know to be true. How do we even know that there was any group in the woods that Jeremy called the police on and that they acted on and arrested? I didn't hear anything about that.
That's true. I haven't.
Where was the
you're right.
media
You're right.
that covered? I mean, let's be honest. This is a media that's looking. They want to paint anybody that they can fucking possibly paint as IMVE, and they're handed something like this on a silver platter, and nobody in the fucking country hears about it. It's not headline news. They got their boogeyman and they don't fucking report on it?
All I'm saying is that he's admitted that he will be an informant for the state, which gives him very, very clear, plausible deniability. Whether that's by design or whether that's genuine, I don't know.
All right, let's keep it rolling, because I think there's another 10 minutes left in the Fifth Estate program here.
Okay, sure. Yeah, sorry.
Let's hold our tongues and try to get through it.
Touches.
I'm going to shoot straight with you. I think you had to have known about them other guns because they were out in the open. And I don't know why you couldn't have been.
In the house?
No, in the trailer.
Chris Lysak didn't say very much in his interview with police, but look at his shirt.
Supposed to go shoot coyotes and stuff, but
okay.
In the 2-hour interview we watched, not once did the investigator ask Lysak about the symbol on his shirt.
I don't think they dug as deeply into that as maybe they could have. The Diagolon
wasn't
well known at this point, but it was in the news eventually. They were kind of treating it as if like a normal crime rather than something that might have been more significant.
They were in the news eventually because of you fucking idiots making them into something they weren't.
That's exactly right. So there's an issue here with timeline. So the Canadian Anti-Hate Network are saying, how could the RCMP not have known? But the CBC was publishing that article February 14th, 2022, the day of the arrest, alleging that the issue was the Diagolon vests. So who is it almost seems like they missed a meeting. Like the two narratives weren't matching at the time. And now they're backtracking on that. It seems very strange to me. Like, who is the tail wagging the dog here?
Exactly. It's narrative recycling and narrative construction for other purposes.
Well, it's
and it's the chicken before the egg problem.
It's a reverse construction, right? They were reverse engineering a crime that never happened.
That's exactly right. But how could Canadian Anti-Hate Network have made the connection, the Diagolon connection, before the RCMP, and now they're criticizing the RCMP
because
for not?
They were getting information about Diagolon. They were the ones that first published after Mackenzie's incident outside of Dr. Strang's house and the arrest where he drunkenly went online waving a handgun around. Like this guy is literally, being trotted out to events, to paint narratives and being recorded by Peter McIsaac everywhere he goes, right? From the Dalhousie event to his time in Ottawa to Dr. Strang's. He's got a professional media crew to follow him and take images, and then things go viral and get pumped. He's on Gavin McInnes's show not 12 hours after the Dalhousie event, right? Like, this is not organic.
And this is why I didn't even want to show this. I'm gonna let it keep rolling, but I don't even think we should publicize this. It's so absurd. But I'll keep going out of respect for everybody here.
Streaming to their channel at Coutts.
Now we're going to arrest you for ordering drugs.
For what? You've got that many rifles. I mean, let's face it. That's a lot of cow hunting.
Lysak's case helped boost Diagolon's profile.
I was on the phone with this lawyer, and he says, for this to happen, we need $200,000 by, 10 days or something? It was some tights, and I was like, sure, we got it. And I entirely bet that all on my faith in you guys and the strength of this community to get this done.
We're seeing Diagolon members forming active clubs, groups to get together to exercise and to train. So this group that used to say it was an online joke, a mean country, is now involved in real life activities.
And whose fucking fault is that? You blew it up, you fucking idiot.
There will be violent encounter of some sort.
But was all the evidence going to be enough for a conviction? Coming up, why the jury had its doubts about the men's guilt, and some harsh words from the judge.
This was treated as a standard series of street-level crime. Because of that, they've gotten away fairly lightly, in my opinion.
Bullshit. They treated it like a national security emergency. They literally imposed martial law on us for this.
Dragged on for over 2 years. There's a
And they're making it like, so just so everybody knows, the jury never tells anybody about what their thought process was. None of us know. So the fact that they're going to project what they believe the jury had for a problem here is anybody's guess. So just take all that with a grain of fucking salt, because the jury doesn't talk to anybody and nobody knows.
Exactly. It is incredibly Canadian law is weird when it comes to the feelings of jurors. If you publicize the feeling of a juror, it is punishable by law of minimum 5 years. I don't know why Canada has weird juror laws. So either they're pretending that they know, or they do know and they publicize it, which again would be illegal. So that's a good point. The feelings of jurors are confidential and sacrosanct in Canada for publishing purposes.
Supporters remain defiant, even as the men face spending over a decade in prison if convicted.
Certain people had this view that we could, within a year's or a half year's time, be forced to take extraordinary measures to get our daily needs. So these men were prepared to resist further than others were.
As the allegations were put to the test, an early sign the evidence wasn't going to add up to a conviction. The Crown dropped the conspiracy to murder charge against 2 of the men.
The big news today is that, thank goodness, Chris is going to be released, Lysak, and I guess Jerry Morin as well.
Jerry Morin took a plea deal last winter, admitting he was guilty of conspiring to traffic firearms at the Coutts blockade.
He actually never admitted guilt. That was a very public statement put out by his lawyer that he maintained his innocence. There was no admission of guilt, FYI.
I told you, remember? You went for I think 10 minutes explaining the nature of his plea deal. They just went over it in 1.5 seconds. It's irrelevant. There were these 4 guys accused of conspiracy to commit murder. 2 of them, we just dropped the charges. Wouldn't, as a journalist, you be interested in knowing, well, why did that happen? How did that happen?
Before you hit play, I just want to know, before we move on, does this program ever talk about the initial offers of sedition that happened beforehand?
Are you kidding me? Is that a genuine question? Of course not.
Right. Well, we're just establishing it for anybody that doesn't know that, Johnston tried to get all of these guys, except maybe Carbert, I'm not sure, to plea out on sedition. To plea out on sedition, we'll give you 8 years. Just plead guilty to sedition. We'll drop everything else. And all
Has this documentary dealt with one court proceeding at all?
Not yet. Not that I can see.
Has it discussed anything that occurred in court? No.
It's really devoid of a factual basis. This is all narrative spin. It's ridiculous.
He was convicted of possessing a restricted firearm in an unauthorized place. He had a handgun with a round in the chamber. Celebrating his release, leaders of Diagolon.
In Lysak's case, he's in pictures with me, and he's involved with a lot of you guys in a friendly capacity, and was a fan of a podcast.
Both Lysak and Morin were sentenced to 3 years, equal to their time served. Tony Olienick and Chris Carbert's case did proceed to trial. The jury ultimately didn't see everything we've shown you. They did review dozens of exhibits, including tactical vests and medical kits. They heard from 30...
Didn't see everything we've shown you.
Didn't see anything we showed you.
And FYI, they successfully disarmed 2 men. FYI. Disarmed them. Bands.
But they didn't... Did you notice what they just did there? In 2 seconds, they said the jury did not see everything we just showed you. What of what you just showed us did they see? Did they see the infamous gun picture? They did not.
No.
Did they see the diagolon theory? They did not.
No.
That's the entirety of the documentary. Did they see the bunker? They did not. The jury did not see anything that we just showed. Nothing.
The CBC is trying the men in the court of public opinion because they didn't like the outcome of the judicial process.
100%. 100%.
100%. I agree. Keep going.
3 witnesses and watched Olienick's interview with police.
We're just trying to be protectors, just in case, because we've seen it all over the world, Andy. Like law enforcement and governments can do bad things, and we're just there to protect. That's it.
It all came down to the key question: did the men have a plan to attack? The jury was not convinced that they did, and so they found Carbert and Olienick not guilty of conspiring to kill RCMP officers.
I can see where there's reasonable doubt. Not a lot, but there's reasonable doubt. When we have individuals who are caught up in this fervor, this rage, this fear that's driven by absolute nonsensical beliefs, but they believe it, at what point does that trigger the courts to take a judicial action against these individuals?
Notice that they don't talk at all about the fucking fact that we had a medical apartheid going on at that time. Like, they want to focus in on the political beliefs of the men instead of focusing it all on the fact that we were all being held hostage under medical tyranny to either take a fucking mRNA or lose everything. And that is not an unhealthy, kooky booky fear. We were in the fucking midst of it. So Mr. Criminologist would like to just forget that 2020 to 2022 never fucking happened.
Well, and I would like to, I hate myself sometimes, but I kind of agree with Kelly Sundberg here a little bit, in the sense that there was reasonable doubt with regards to the weapons for a dangerous purpose charge. And it's not my feeling, that's just my perception of how the jury felt. I believe as well that the jury had absolute doubt of the conspiracy to commit murder charge. Like they just thought that was completely ridiculous because there was nothing presented in trial to that effect. We were never going to get to a guilty charge, never, on conspiracy to commit murder. Possession of weapons for a dangerous purpose, maybe, because you got a lot of super normies on there.
But let's talk about what that charge means, right? These individuals. These individuals are being convicted on the basis of saying that they had a legally owned, legally stored firearm for the purpose of defending themselves. Look, this is a problem in the nation of Canada, that people are not entitled to own weapons for the purpose of self-defense. That is prohibited here in Canada. And so what we're talking about is those convictions representing a thought crime. It's not that they did a thing wrong. It's they have a wrong belief. This is a thought crime in Canada.
Yeah, we learned through that process in the courtroom very clearly, actually, that you don't have the right to defend yourself in Canada. You don't. So if you, let's just say I'm holding, well, look at this, see this water jug right here? It's metal, okay? It's perfectly fine until I say, I'm going out for a walk tonight and I'm taking my water jug with me just in case, anybody attacks me. I'm going to hit him with this. Guess
You're
what?
in possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose.
Yes, exactly.
I tell people this all the time.
That's literally how it works in Canada. It's that dumb, as a matter of fact.
It's so dumb, in fact, that if you used the weapon to defend yourself, you might be okay. But
actually, no. As long as there's no record anywhere of you saying that you would use it to defend yourself,
that's the issue. That's the issue. It's saying that you want to defend yourself that is more illegal than defending yourself.
Right. Like my baseball bat beside my head is perfectly fine until I suggest that it's there for a reason.
And that's the crux of this entire case.
Right.
Is that we don't have a concept of preemptive self-defense in Canada.
You don't. None.
And if you were a good journalist, that would be the story.
And on the thought crime, I want to add to what Buck said. Again, we know, and we didn't find out till afterwards because it was kept on the down low, Stephen Johnston knew he didn't have a conspiracy to murder. He knew he didn't have a case. He offered 3 out of the 4 of these guys we know for sure out on sedition. Just plead to sedition. We'll give you 8 years. We'll get you out. They knew it. Johnston knew it. He lost on 2 of them. That was beyond his control. But with the other 2, he kept going. Why did they keep going when he knew he didn't have a case? Pardon a little interruption there. We're having to re-record a couple of minutes of this segment for legal purposes. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Johnson started pre-construction at the warrant level when he pushed forward the signing of a warrant for documents and data, knowing full well that was not what the mission was about. He had already pre-constructed the crime when he wanted it to happen, and that's why he was accused of crime fraud in court. Unfortunately, none of us got to see that disclosure before the Law Society, out of nowhere, came in and instructed for it to be resealed and for a request to be made to use disclosed evidence, which if you look under the Evidence Act in Canada, whenever something is disclosed to you from the Crown, whether they meant to or they didn't, it's yours to use. It's been disclosed. There's nothing you can do about it at that point. But they go and cry client solicitor privilege, which, don't ask me how, because the Crown never acts as a solicitor towards the RCMP in the midst of an investigation. They are not their legal counsel. So why they were able to cloak that in client solicitor privilege with the help of the Law Society and then packaging it up as a request to use good disclosure within your potential application process, we still don't understand. We have no idea what the hell happened there or why that lawyer chose to the Law Society to take direction from them. It's still a big mystery. This is a huge problem that took place, and we still don't know. They have successfully sealed it up and made it inaccessible. I think it is fair that one could speculate that what is in that envelope and was sealed is the actual conspiracy at Coutts, and that's why it was sealed. In my personal opinion, based on what I could piece together from what was talked about, is that Johnston, like the cops, knew that there was no confirmation of any firearms. There was no threat going on there. Nobody knew about those firearms except for the people that own them, and that was the end of it, and so they needed to shut this down. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And so they started reverse engineering this whole thing by saying, it doesn't matter that we don't know. We don't have any credible information to take to a judge and get a real warrant. Let's just do documents and data, because when you do documents and data, that's a whole nother thing. A documents and data warrant allows you to flip over mattresses, pull out every single drawer. You have no limitations on how you can do the search, and that's exactly why they chose it that way. Just instructed them to do it that way, and then he took it to a judge under false pretenses. That's exactly what happened.
But at the same time, this would be the crux of the issue if these defendants were guilty. What are they guilty of? Like, all of these privacy issues would be this would be our silver bullet, if you will, if they were guilty of a crime. I'm still not exactly clear what the crime is here.
Let me describe
Possession
it.
of
There's no victim. There's no harm or damage. There's no victim.
Exactly,
so there's no crime.
Exactly. So what does this even matter? Like, all of the privacy breaches are really a gift. Because
let me summarize it.
Hold on, Mike. I was listening. I saw the text messages. I heard the phone calls. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. Even what was allowed into the court or what wasn't allowed into the court, I have yet to hear of anything that's particularly incriminating. What is the crime?
They were convicted of a thought crime in that they possessed a weapon for
right, exactly. But obtaining the evidence.
Let me finish. Tony was convicted of possessing something he didn't know he had, right? And we're talking about the criminalization of protest under the mischief catch-all that the government has trotted out for anybody who had any identifiable position, even just doing logistics or trying to keep things peaceful or any status or identifiability within the convoy movement. They throw that generalized charge at you. So that is what it is.
And we just saw that on Friday with the 5 convictions against Pat King.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is ongoing and it's beyond Coutts. Like, the use of mischief against anybody and everybody involved with the convoy, from the sort of famous people like Tamara Litch and Chris Barber to Pat King to the boys in Coutts to people who nobody even knows their names who got pulled back into court. The Crown would appeal the acquittals. Like this is happening to everybody.
And even like that, even the mischief, because mischief strictly states that, that there was, an impedance of the use of or a loss, based on which there was no economic loss. Everything was rerouted. Everything that wanted to cross the border crossed the border. There was no holdup. You might have had to go to a different crossing, but you still came across. The CBSA was never shut down. They even report on that. Yes.
Well, it reminds me. They also locked down the entire economy for 2 years,
right,
and restricted people's border access. So it reminds me of that part of the documentary where they said Tony called Trudeau a terrorist. Well, it's fine for the government to call you a terrorist, but how dare you call the government a terrorist?
But it's important to understand that what they said and like what they're the basis that they're using. So mischief has to be, again, there has to be impedance of or damage to. Like the people of Coutts still were able to get in and out of the town, no thanks to the cops, because they boxed them in and made every access route a checkpoint. So it was them that locked down the town of Coutts. It was them that took over the CBSA.
It was only a 75%
the border, right?
It was only a 75% terrorism supporting town. It wasn't 100%.
But again, there was no loss. So even the mischief is an absolute garbage charge. There was nobody. Did you know who held up the people from using Highway 4? The police at Milk River when they completely barricaded it off. Do you know who held up the use of the border? The police when they shut it. Do you know who held up the economy during COVID? The government, when they chose to shut everybody in and close down small business. Like everything that they wanted to project onto the people, they were guilty of themselves.
100%, Jacqueline, 100%. Can we finish the last 2 minutes? I think we got, 2 minutes left?
Asked for time served, while the Crown argued for 9 years. Instead, the judge sentenced them to 6.5 years and banned them for life from owning firearms.
He considered the danger to the police to be high. I would disagree with that, but that's his decision. The sentence is excessive with strong political features, and it will be appealed.
What I took from the judge's reasons is that the sentence was so high in order to send a message to the public, you can't do this. And I don't quarrel with the fact that you shouldn't have guns at a protest and that the judge was appropriate in sending that message. But in terms of the actual harm done as opposed to what could have been done, I think that those are two different things.
Justice LeBren said in his sentencing decision that Carbert and Olienick had intentionally armed themselves for political reasons. He called their claim of self-defense against the police nebulous and fanciful. While their appeal is awaiting consideration, Carbert and Olienick are serving their time in the Badlands of Alberta at the medium security prison, the Drumheller Institution. They were given credit for the time served in custody and have 2 years left on their sentence.
The one thing I think I got from it is that these are people who are, again, obviously true believers. These are people who no amount of time in jail is going to change that. They can't think of themselves as being criminals, and neither can their supporters. These are good, godly family men who are just doing what they're doing to protect them.
I conclude that these are extremely privileged individuals. They got away very lightly and should consider themselves extremely fortunate. I rest my case.
The Fifth Estate requested interviews with all four men and their lawyers. They all declined.
Who's going to make the next play? What's the government going to do? They know that more and more Canadians in the world is waking up to what they were doing and what their intent was. And I believe truly that if they keep pushing, that rising will come again.
Why do you consider them heroes?
Because they were willing to fight for our freedoms.
It's something that isn't going to go away anytime soon. The community that was developed as a result of this, they're still agitated, they're still angry, they're still looking for change, and in their mind, prosecuting those that have done them wrong.
I don't think this case solidifies anything by any stretch, but it sure does show us that any future case is going to be incredibly difficult. There needs to be more preparation because this isn't going to be the last time.
The convoy still.
What does that even mean? That word salad out of that fat fuck. Anyways, what does that even mean?
Well, it hopes what happened here offers a lesson to Canadians.
I believe this should have woken up some of the people that thought they understood what was going on. We tend to ignore people that we don't want to listen to. We tend to just brush them off and say, well, they're just a bunch of nuts. And that's a hazard for both sides.
Yeah, exactly what the nice mayor did. Isn't that great? I'm glad to see he's got some self-fucking awareness at this point, and maybe he's reflecting on his own behaviors, because what his statement there is exactly what he did. So
I think that.
Well, yeah. No, okay. Forgive me, guys. Hold on. The last 30 seconds, you're gonna hate me for this. Loved it. And I heard from somebody else, second party, Tony liked some things. I think that's what he probably liked. Because at the end, Jim Willett encourages people not to dehumanize the other side. Which is ironic, of course, because that's exactly what this documentary did.
Well, that's exactly what Jim Willett did when he asked the Canadian press to deem everybody as fucking terrorists. So interesting.
That's what makes it such a cool ending, though.
No,
yeah,
but
the hypocrite,
exactly
of it. So fantastic.
Exactly. Everything all dies on its own words. It's kind of interesting. It's just artistically, it's not maybe
it's a lot of confession through projection, and I think they reveal it right at the end there, where he says, look, this community of agitated people, they're not going to go away, and they're looking for change. And so the whole point of this is to paint any political organizing seeking accountability for what went on during COVID, for what they did to us, and to rectify the situation. They've painted us all as end of the world, end times, revelation, nut bar, whatever, militants, right? That is the whole purpose here, is to dissuade the public from seeking accountability for fear of getting grouped in with people of low social standing.
Right. So this is exactly, you're 100% right, Buck. And the the blatantly hypocritical part of this is the sort of, the CBC and NPR and the Washington Post in the States, the sort of global liberal establishment media who are constantly going on about democracy. Democracy. Yeah, these people are agitated. They are called citizens. They have legitimate grievance against government overreach into their lives, their communities, and society writ large, as what went down in COVID. What did these people, this idiot from Con and that other fella, they got off lightly. These are very privileged individuals. Kook bait, as Alex put it, with the inclusion of this fucking nobody that nobody's ever heard of, some DEI hire from some university.
Rage bait.
Yeah, exactly. Rage bait. And it is rage inducing. If you're a regular person that's been told your whole life to step up and say something when you see something wrong, that your vote matters, that your participation in democracy matters, then these clowns come and just come and rub your nose in it and tell you, no, actually it doesn't. Because if you protest, we're going to do this to you.
Right.
My participation in democracy is suddenly emboldened. I just had a realization. If they have access to the entire trial transcripts, then I should be able to access that through an access to information request to CBC on how they made this documentary.
Yes. Way to go, Zoltan.
Yeah.
We just saved ourselves a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, listen, folks, I think we did a good job. We did aim for exhaustive, but I still think there was more we didn't cover. So hopefully our listeners got to the end.
Yeah, even in particular, I think it's interesting that they so especially when they gloss over Jerry's plea deal, right? Because let's not forget that I went and testified the true information that was accepted by the judge. I'm a credible witness that blew Jerry's plea deal statement of facts right out of the water. There's no statement of facts there. None of that happened. So they didn't bother to touch on that either, that the exact plea deal that was taken that kicked him out, got him out of jail, and also left unvetted evidence against the other two men was completely, shot down at trial.
Right. And something else, and I keep harping on about this, but like, if the CBC, we know that they're state propagandists, but let's take their claim to be like legitimate journalists seriously. If they're supposed to be holding power to account, where is the documentary about the actions of Stephen Johnston and the other Crown prosecutors on his team? Where is the investigation into the whole envelope drama? Where is the investigation into the execution of these warrants? Where is the investigation into the incarceration of Jerry Morin and Tony Olienick for long periods of solitary confinement, the denial of necessary medical care to all four of them, and all these other people that the four guys have ran into while they were inside? Where are those investigations? Where's the investigation into Alberta Health Services or Alberta Corrections? Where's the investigation into the RCMP? Where is it? Right? Like this.
Where is the journalistic curiosity into the infamous guns picture?
The denial of the bail and the ridiculous secondary treachery grounds that were used to just excuse away counter evidence that was provided on a reverse onus freaking bail hearing, for heaven's sakes. Like, none of that was even accepted or
But this documentary is
acknowledged.
A gift. This documentary is a gift because this is the video version of the article from February 14th, 2022. They can no longer pretend that they were in error. This was the narrative that they intended to construct then and that they've intended to continue until now. But we have the facts.
And it's probably actionable too.
Yes,
I mean, they have the platform.
Buck has pretty much, laid it out that there is a case here.
There is a case
for malicious prosecution, period.
Absolutely. And they acknowledged that in the first 3 minutes when they said we could not release any of this information prior to because it would hurt these people's right to a free trial.
Which they did try to. It wasn't their own. It wasn't their good ethical behavior. They did it already on the 22nd of October, 2022, through their own admission, which nothing was done about. And then they were attempting to do it in February of 2023 before we ever got to pretrial, let alone trial. And they were shut down via the legal team. This is not their choice. They had no legal fucking pathway to do this documentary until after the trial was over, but they had tried. They were definitely trying.
Right. But then they published it, and it's incriminating on them because it's the exact same narrative as the day of the arrest. Nothing has changed. How could nothing change? And if nothing changes, and you say we couldn't have released this before because it would have hurt their right to a fair trial, they've hurt these people's rights to a fair trial. That's the damage.
Did. That was their intent, and they actually did.
But they're proving that,
and they got off with it. Is the problem? They've gotten away with it.
They haven't, and they won't. They won't get away with this, and they could have had they not made this documentary. Is my point. This documentary is the most incriminating thing that the Crown, the government, the CBC, the RCMP has ever produced. It's the most incriminating thing. It shows that they never wanted these people to have a right to a fair trial. Yeah. They never intended to let them have a right to a fair trial. They had created a narrative.
Of bad faith.
Exactly. It's a proof of bad faith. Thank you, Bob.
Well, that's all we're ever going to get from the state broadcaster in this little dictatorship.
But platforms have changed. We now have a voice. And
I think it's important to bring up the fact that, their little sideshow, Diagolon, at the last minute, right when we were, right there ready to just shred this case all to pieces with the heavy-weighted warrants, came in with their, with their chaos agent buddies, Levine and Best, to disparage the fundraising efforts, cut us off from being able to continue to go further with our legal fundraising, and to create a narrative that destroyed our fundraisers and our spokesperson's life, as a matter of fact, and started pointing fingers at those of us still going through it as some sort of agents as well that were helping her. It was ridiculous. And what benefit does that have? The only people that benefit from all of that horseshit and that nonsense, which was a complete made-up falsehood. Everybody, And don't get me wrong, I'm happy Lysak got help. But everybody that donated to him out of the drama of he was stolen from and his dad was being abused was bamboozled. That was a false narrative. It never happened. And they extracted money out of people based on something that did not happen, that didn't go on, in order for Chris to be pled out and evidence to be left behind
And you know what's
uncontested
really
against the
disgusting
other
about-
two men. And that was only, you know who that helped? That helped the Crown. It didn't help the men. It didn't help Canadians. It didn't help protesters. You know, it didn't help dissenting Canadians. It helped the fucking Crown. So think about that. Think about that.
And also think about how come nobody from Diagolon has said a word about this documentary. Not one
I could
word.
give a fuck what they think about anything.
Exactly. That's why I skipped past their thing, because I don't want to platform them. I don't care. But that really bothers me. If somebody made a documentary called Wife Murderer and accused me of being the mastermind behind somebody being accused of murdering somebody, and then they were not guilty, I'd be very upset about that. Like how come none of these people are saying this is libel against me? Because it just seems odd. And I think Bucket was
Listen, I'm sure we'll see the victimhood show up here very soon, because Lord knows that there's no bigger victims than Diagolon. So,
that's true.
You know, I'm sure that'll be coming.
They're busy infiltrating the populist movement in Canada at this
That's
moment
right.
and smearing it. So
exactly.
they're busy.
I think
They'll
they
get
were
back to
hoping
us.
that we would all be talking to Port about that one fella. That I think that's, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I feel
listen,
like that was that was the kook bait. They all wanted to go deport. And then
Well, what that guy said about how the supporters are still there and they still are looking for change. Well, this is phase 2, right? Ensure that anyone who does want change is painted as some psycho, conspiracy theorist, racist wingnuts, even now white nationalists, according to their fucking shtick, which is ridiculous.
Christian nationalists.
No, white nationalists. Sorry, I don't think there's any Christianity floating around fucking Diagolon.
Christian nationalists.
It's a goddamn, they're skinheads. Let's just make it real clear. Fucking skinhead losers is what they are. I mean, they went through this entire process of we're debunking hate. What is it called? Hate gate? Only to switch gears and fulfill every fucking accusation that's ever been made of them since the whole, Middle East shit popped off.
Well, isn't it strange too that Hategate occurred in between when they started this production and when they finished it, and they didn't feature that in the documentary? The fact that the Canadian anti-hate network narrative was already thoroughly debunked.
Well, the CBC is not going to provide any countervailing information. They again, our whole discussion.
But they do have a responsibility to.
Right. Well, again.
And what, propagandists? What's a propagandist's responsibility again in a dictatorship? Please explain it to me, because I'm not quite fucking up on all those regulations and policies.
Am I naive? Am I stupid?
The mainstream media in Canada has a 32% confidence rating with the people of Canada, and the only institution that fares worse than that is the federal government at 31%.
Exactly. Yeah. Populism is bad in this country. It always has been. I mean, just go read. You can read their own parliamentary reports about how they feel about us, especially when they feel like we want to say. They hate it. They hate it really bad. And what they do is they look for ways to either settle us down or disparage us. So stuff like recall legislation, stuff like referendums that are non-binding. These are the types of tools that they've placed in front of us in the past, but we're at the end of the tools they're willing to give us. They gave us recall and they gave us referendums, non-binding ones. And now we're still asking to have a say. We're a big fucking problem, okay? And what they do is they find ways to cut us off at the knees. So a populist movement is akin to overthrowing the government in their mind, quite honestly, because how dare the peasants want to fucking say? You're not supposed to have a say. You're not invited to have a say. And having a say actually threatens their authority, that is the ultimate no-no. So this is where we're at.
Are we still doing the show, or are we just shooting the shit now? Like,
I haven't stopped recording. I did want to get to some stuff Buck's looked into.
Yes.
And again, like something that has been of great interest to me and Buck, and should be to everybody else. And again, a lot of people listen to the show are Americans. Like that's like 60% of my downloads and my listeners come from the U.S. Is that like the Americans need to understand how much their own government was up in this, right? Like I keep saying, I've mentioned it in numerous articles, like Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg were heavily involved in discussions with Trudeau and Freeland and everybody else in the government. And then through the ATIP documents, Buck found that like the seeding of this narrative.
It's just classic insecure Americans trying to make themselves relevant.
Right. Or insecure Canadians that got nothing better to do than import the pathologies of the neighbors. And Buck has dug up some receipts about how that's been seeded by the FBI. Buck, please go, man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just to be quick, I mean, to summarize here, the U.S. involvement in the events of the convoy, it was the FBI that seeded the narrative that ideologically motivated violent extremists will infiltrate the convoy 2 weeks before a truck ever showed up in Ottawa. It was the Department of Homeland Security that was booting Canadians and convoyers off social media, at the request, essentially threatening to revoke their Section 230 status as publishers and make them liable. It was the State Department that was in the bunker, in the command center with Trudeau and the cabinet during the events of the convoy. And FBI agents were on site in Ottawa for an undisclosed operational purpose, particularly towards the end of the events in Ottawa. So, that's just a taste of it. But the truth is that what we have is we have imported. We have become a subsidiary of the intelligence community of the United States. That MI5, the Five Eyes nations like MI5 and New Zealand, Australia, Canada, work subsidiary to their U.S. counterparts. Right? It was Jake Sullivan who was at the Liberal cabinet retreat this summer. When after the Mosley decision and Trudeau's legitimacy was deeply in question. What we saw was Canada defending U.S. policies that wouldn't even hold up in the United States of America because at least your judicial system, and your constitution was strong enough to push back on things like the private employer vaccine mandate.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is. When I was remarking earlier about the similarities here, it's like we have two movements, right? That of the so-called extremists, the Proud Boy thing that culminated in the Jan 6th, in a bunch of quote unquote insurrection with hundreds of federal operators involved in the events of Jan 6th, and storming the Capitol, as they say. And this narrative here in Canada a year later that this was an insurrection. We have Mark Carney going on the news media and saying this, the word occupation being used over and over in the news media and by all the politicians, and it wasn't. It was peaceful protest that had been upheld as lawful speech by the injunction, the Ottawa judge who, told people to stop honking, but that they could continue their protest. And so, this is the thing that I hope American audiences can appreciate, right? And frankly, that young Canadians or Canadians who have forgotten, thinking that somehow, Chinese communists are the threat to Canada, and not what we've known for our entire history as a nation, that, our biggest threat to our national sovereignty is from the South, right? When the British Empire
when
the British Empire lost its supreme status, right? The Anglo Empire became the Anglo-American Empire, and it's run out of DC.
Yeah,
right?
no, it never stopped. It never stopped being the British Empire. They just decamped to DC and changed names.
Right. The Fed made sure that it actually never was what it was supposed to be. Right. That's the real captor.
Right, but I think I don't want to downplay the Chinese stuff, man, because both things can be true. The American,
it's the UN. It's the UN, Gord. Okay, who's the Power Five of the UN? The United States of America, the UK, France, China, and Russia. Those are your five power. They're the power structure. They run the UN. They're in charge of the Security Council. The UN agenda is what's been playing out here. That's what COVID was. You know, the SDG agenda. And so, of course, we're going to be getting, you know, infiltration from one of the P5s that's our next door neighbor. And the Five Eyes is not an intelligence
country, Jacqueline?
community.
Which country contributes the most to the UN?
I'm sorry?
Which country do you think contributes the most to
the US?
No. It's China.
Well, contributes as in participation would be
No, in terms of monetarily. China runs the UN at this point.
Well, they do and they don't. Like they are. There's a power structure of 5 nations.
Of course, yeah.
Yes,
China, United States,
the idea,
France, Russia, and
yes, but Alex, the idea that they're not allied is hilarious. As a matter of fact, they're allied. That's the biggest psyop of the entire thing. Is that there is an agenda here that 5 countries in particular have that run this organization have been pushing onto their nations, and they've been insinuating that everybody else should too. As a matter of fact.
Sorry, I guess I was just like piggybacking off of Gordon Buck's discussion and your discussion as well. Is that like I don't think it's just the United States that made this happen, and I don't think it's just China.
No, it isn't. It's the UN, period, which is a combination.
It's a lot of different people, because now we're seeing too with the foreign interference stuff with India, like because they're a rising power, and the world is getting very small, right? Just because we can travel faster, information can move faster. There's so
but it's not about it's not about what's going on now. This has been going on for a fucking century at least.
Yeah, it's just just way over the speed limit now. That's all.
Sure. Actually, no, we're noticing more because they're getting more and more totalitarian with how they're doing things, because the end goal is full control. So eventually you got to be pinched. That's just the way it is. Right. And like they're pinching real hard at this point because they're getting to the end of their end game. So yeah, this is why we're feeling major pinch now.
The other thing that I've been digging at is I got ATIPs with respect to research commissioned by the Privy Council, and what it came back was essentially the public polling and research that Impact Canada had done on their behavioral science program that really kind of kicked into gear in 2020, and it had 3 domains. COVID-19, obviously we were heavily psyoped and nudged and pushed there. The other 2 being the climate change agenda, and the last one being DEI, but in Canada we call it anti-racism equity and inclusion, because not everybody's about being pro diversity, but nobody wants to be a racist, right? And so that's an applied example of behavioral science on. So this is the thing, is like we take these policies from the United States, we dress them up in plaid to make them Canadian, and then we roll them out on our people, right? Like these are live fire psychological operations being done by your government on you. Justin Trudeau told you to leave the room while he talked to your kids about taking a vaccine, and then they measured the effect of that. Exactly. Right? That is despicable that our government would do that to us without our knowledge and consent. And that's what I hope we don't lose about these stories. Is like everything from the construction of this faux national security crisis by some faux ideologically motivated violent extremist group to paint all of us and populism terribly. Like it's so far beyond that, right? It's all of society. They want to control literally our minds and our beliefs, and they'll weaponize the media, the judiciary. It's a whole of society operation, and it's internationally coordinated.
Yes, and if you look at the UN, look at UN 2.0. As a matter of fact, they have a brand new website up, UN 2.0. Go look at their quintet. It's 4 items that are very important to them. And don't forget, this is 2.0 because they're behind on their agenda because of people like all of us who don't agree with it and know to sit and push back. So they're not happy about that. One of the pushes that they're doing is behavioral science. How do we manipulate these people into doing what we want them to do? It's full-on psyop manipulation. This is a huge tactic of theirs, plus the youth.
You persuade them that every extreme weather event is an example of climate change.
Right.
Right? Like you can see it in these reports where they poll everybody. They're like, oh, look at this. 98% of Canadians had a extreme weather event in the last year. Great.
Right.
We'll just equate that with our agenda, and just now everybody's terrified by bad weather.
Exactly.
Well,
And this is a very targeted effort that they have. They understand that they can manipulate us, especially via the internet, right? Because the one advantage that they have of the internet is they can take a tiny little portion of the population or a tiny little idea that most people do not engage with or don't agree with or don't believe in, and blow it up to seem like I'm the only one who doesn't agree with this, right? It makes it, they can take that tiny little voice and amplify it and project it into a way that makes it seem like that's a mainstream thought process that it isn't.
But it is kind of a mainstream thought process. Like I'm pretty mainstream. I'm pretty uncool.
You are pretty mainstream, Zoltan. I've noticed that about you all the time. You got a lot to learn, my friend. You're still baby steps, man. You got a lot to learn. I say that lovingly, but you do have a lot to learn.
Well, no, thanks. No, I appreciate that. That's why I'm having a conversation with you, right? Because I believe that you do learn from the people that you disagree with. I am pretty mainstream, and my attitude towards this, I'm not being dismissive of your concerns. The concerns are valid and they're real. But my concern is that there's not much you can do to make the world less globalized in the face of technology. Like, just remove governments altogether. People can move faster. Information can move faster. It's very easy. Like, we live in a globalized economy of ideas, certainly.
You can without being globalist, and you don't need to fall prey to the surveillance state of the. Listen, technology
but I'm saying, like, okay, sorry,
surveillance. That's what it's about. It doesn't give. It's not about having a convenient little phone in your hand so that you can, GPS yourself all over the place. It's about the state having an ability to surveil us in all things, so they can curate the propaganda even better to push us into the situations that they want for their final outcome, which is manipulative and destructive. And you don't have to succumb to that just because there's technology around you.
We're talking past each other a little bit here, though, because if you don't want foreign interference, then what you would need to combat foreign interference is what? State interference. You can't have both. You can't be free of state.
You don't need either one.
And
you can also reject it altogether. I reject any interference from the state or other states or a country across the fucking ocean altogether. I reject that.
No, here's the thing. Hold on, Alex, please. Yes, you can. If your government doesn't have control over unlimited, money printing, right, and your government doesn't control all of the, cartelish protectionist behavior for your industry, if your government isn't so important, then fewer people will have an interest in corrupting it. And so there is a way to have no state and no foreign interference. It's like to shrink your government to make it rather insignificant and let the private sector people and volunteerism decide how your society is run.
We've tried that to some extent. I think this is like Canada is a litmus test in that.
Are you kidding me? 1 in 4 people's a bureaucrat. We haven't tried that. We haven't tried that. That's not, it hasn't been deployed. No. When was the last time we had small government?
Well, this is the problem with Canada, is it's trying to do two things at once. It's trying to be a post-national state, which is what I'm saying is inevitable anyway. It's inevitable for all states. You're never going to be able to remove foreign interference from any country now because you got the internet. Ideas are globalized. We're done. You're never going to get to a point of having no foreign interference anywhere other than North Korea.
Nobody thinks that's a problem.
Set up some kind of firewall. China's trying it. They're failing.
This is a narrative that's being pushed on us, Alex. If you haven't noticed that intelligence about the Indian government sponsoring hits on Canadian soil, that turned out to be bunk information, right? Like this whole construction, the McDonald-Laurier.
No, it's not bunk
Hold on 1 second. The story
Canadian information, which is bunk by default, but it's not bunk.
It came from the Americans, right? The narrative that it was American intelligence that Justin Trudeau bid on to distract from his own issues that turned it out being bunk, right? So we are misrepresenting the whole cause here. We are being told we need Bill C-70, which outlaws protest, because of the urgent need to address foreign interference, right? The Five Eyes nations have all imposed a foreign agents registry list. The first one happened in the United States in 1938. And then in 2018, right, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and now Canada, which needed a bit of a kick, right, to get onto it. Now we're all part of this foreign agents registry and sharing of information. These are agendas that flow from DC that we are being packaged for the Canadian public as, like, I don't know, Khalistanis versus Hindus or something. But really what that is the US putting pressure on India because they won't sanction Russia. Like, so much of what we perceive as going on, shadows on the wall up here in Canada is, the machinations of what's going on at a much higher level. And even things like the WEF, I think, are held out as whipping boys or false bad guys, the heels, so to speak, so that we can get rid of Bilderberg and replace it with something else. And we'll get rid of the WEF and something else will come along. The UN is like some, a body that has changed in its orientation over its lifespan, but it's not one thing like, oh, it's the Chinese own it or the US own it. So let's not focus on really the puppets, but what's the puppet master and whose interest do these policies serve? Because we've just been fighting.
I don't believe there's any puppet master. I believe it's pure
shouldn't
chaos.
Be a part of.
Well,
because
let's acknowledge too that the U.S. uses the Five Eyes as a way to circumvent their own constitution. They're not allowed to surveil their own citizens. So they get Canada or New Zealand or Australia to do it for them and then share the information with them. Like, it's a way for them to circumvent their own fucking laws and get away with it. And we do the same thing. We'll just have the NSA surveil us, so that it's not CSIS, right? And then they just share the information, right?
Not just laws, to circumvent the Constitution. The supreme law of the land.
Right.
Is undermined by the Five Eyes Agreement.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, but the constitutions in most countries also state that the responsibility of the head of state and the government is to keep its citizens safe. Right? So
but when they set up their own apparatus to go outside of that to make it legal, it's a little so this is what we call stuff like deep state, because
this is the thing, Jacqueline. It's like
operating in good faith of their own
if your stories, like the story of you and Jerry and then the other Coutts people, like, didn't exist, then I would have no problem with the system at all. This is why I really enjoy meeting with folks like yourselves, like-minded people and people that have experienced the overreach of the state, because it presents really interesting conversations about how do we provide that perfect balance, because bad actors do exist, of course. We do want to be safe from them.
Speaking of that, I did hear, I haven't confirmed this yet, but I do recall that there was question about whether the FBI had made a request to view the contents of Chris Lyzak's phone after his arrest. So there's a potential there, some we need to look into, but I do recall that that coming up. From someone that was helping him at one point in the beginning days, and so it'd be interesting to find out if that did in fact happen, if they ever did get access to it.
Well, Chris Lyzak's mean. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. He just wasn't very nice, from my experience. He was a weird guy. He's
a liar, that's for sure, because he lied about Margaret and he lied about myself, and even his dad will tell you that. His dad's a really nice guy. Mike's a wonderful man.
I'm sure he is. I just remember Gordon and I, he did not want to talk to us at all. He just was very...
Well, he's probably feeling pretty stupid about the things that he engaged in order to get the attention that he got through Diagolon by disparaging the people who did actually try to help him in the beginning days. I'm sure that, hopefully he does have some self-reflection about that. And I hope that he does have some, some internal conflicts about it, because what he did was wrong and he knows what he did was wrong. And it's too bad, but whatever. So
it's very odd that the only person who is actually found to have been guilty by his own admission of a crime of any real nature,
right,
was like let off right away, and it was sitting in the trial. Like that was so strange.
Whatever. Nobody. I don't profess to understand what goes on in his head. I don't know him.
And in terms of the
all I
documentary,
know is
I'm not
that-
trying to pick on Mizek. I don't really care. I'm scared of him anyway. But like the documentary, it was so odd to me that they featured, and this is one thing I wanted to point out, was the vests. So those were filmed, the close-up things that they did of the vest and everything in the courtroom. How did they gain access, CBC, to that evidence? Because normally in a court of law, if like I as a journalist, just like Krychek with the interviews, you have to make a public request.
Right.
So I see that there are quite a few examples, again with the Kurt Phillips thing, with him watching the interrogations from his laptop in November of 2022, which was before it would have been available. There seems to be many serious security breaches here.
It's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's not a conspiracy. This is just against the law.
Yes, it is.
No, the whole thing is a conspiracy against dissident political.
Well, it's both. It's both. But I'm
Yes.
saying there are
Conspiracy.
there are individual things that are against the law. Like to say that something is a grand conspiracy theory is just fine. But I think that you guys are due for damages. Like I think that
So the
this
Crown
is
broke the
a
law,
precious
the
gift if
media
you were
broke
looking
the
to
law, the RCMP broke the law. Shall I go on? Like, why are all these agents of the state running around breaking the law and telling lies?
Right. Well,
It's a
prosecuting
conspiracy.
people. Well, prosecuting people. You don't have the moral authority to prosecute people when you're a lawbreaker yourself. Sorry.
Jacqueline, I think that you should do a class action lawsuit.
Well,
that's
fine and dandy, Alex, but here's the thing.
Oh, I know.
Not one of us that's got 5 fucking cents to put towards that, nor the time and energy after the drain. Don't forget, I'm not a court yet. I still have all my shit to deal with. The last thing that's on our fucking minds is trying to get taxpayer money out of assholes that will never admit that they did wrong, that will never change because we go ahead and try to hold them accountable. They're just going to print money and saddle the back of the taxpayer if they even do agree to give us anything. And quite honestly, that won't fix a fucking thing for me. I don't want the taxpayer to be burdened with the
Totally. It's just your money
situation.
anyway. It's like the $250 check. What do you?
To me, it's not worth it. It's not happening. We're not going to go that route because it doesn't make sense.
I understand why you feel that way on principle. It would just so in that case, because I don't care. I don't want anybody to make any money off of this. Who really cares? I want a retraction and an apology. And I will continue pestering the CBC. I will get the access to information. I also think that that's our Trojan horse into getting the transcripts for free because they acknowledged that they had access to the trial. So I think that this is a precious gift, this documentary. I think that we should make gold out of hay.
Right, and I want to wind it down here. We're almost 4 hours. People who follow me and the rest of y'all are kind of probably wondering, what's going on with Chris and Tony. Obviously, they're in Drumheller. What's next? The CBC documentary showed Marilyn saying she was going to appeal. That's changed. There's not going to be an appeal because the mechanics of that are fraught with risk. They're going to take more resources, more time, and more money. And by the time these guys get parole and get let out, they're just going to get let out. So there's not going to be an appeal.
Appealing?
I'm not sure what's going on with the Crown's appeal of the conspiracy not guilty charge. I haven't heard anything about that. I should look into it. But as far as the boys go, the only thing they really have left is, clearing their names, getting at what was in the envelope.
Is Bayak still appealing on behalf of Carbert, or?
I don't know. I never hear from that lady, and you'd think I'd get a thank you note or something. I've sent her thousands of fucking dollars from my Give, Send, Go. I mean,
yeah. Well, the woman that stands in front of the jury and says, "Feel free to find my client guilty of X, Y, Z." I mean, Jesus Christ, find a better lawyer. Fuck.
Well, and Gord, I haven't been doing independent journalism for very long, but I have to tell you, in terms of bang for your buck on investment and return, in all types of way, monetary, reputationally, and personally, this is not a great story.
Yeah, I know, but it's nice. It's not that.
Very selfless endeavor.
It is, but it's nice to get a thank you note from people who should know better, right? Like, well, the whole reason, we've tried to raise money for these guys was to pay for the lawyers, because this shit doesn't come for free, right? Like the one thing Jeremy McKenzie says that is true: lawyers cost money. You have to have really good ones, otherwise you're fucked. The government can just railroad you forever and to infinity. And so that's the whole point of this, is to pay down these lawyers' fees, and that's all I'm saying. Anyway.
Yeah,
So,
well,
No, absolutely. That's fair.
It's also, these. I think that the Crown just spewed out, we're going to appeal, as a way to impression the judge before sentencing. That's what I think. I don't think we'll see an appeal from Johnston.
No, I don't think so either. No, I don't.
Well,
think
then
so.
good. Then the guys will
I
be
think they're
able to have
satisfied with their
standing
outcome.
to sue. The guys will have standing to sue for tort of malicious prosecution.
Right.
Should that be possible?
This is it. Again, I clearing their name, be that the envelope, be that getting Johnston for malicious prosecution, LeBren's for not handling the case correctly, possibly a malicious ruling, or at least improper in the way he kind of ran around the not guilty verdict and spent half the sentencing talking about that. This is it. At this stage of the game, I believe it's simply a matter of clearing their names. As Alex said, this documentary is a gift. Perhaps there's a civil suit later for defamation against CBC and the rest of the media. I want to bring up here real quick before we go, we're attacking the Fifth Estate in this particular show, but the rest of the Canadian media, all of them did basically the same thing. They're all guilty, either of going along with the smearing operation, or failing in their duty to hold power to account, failing to be curious, failing to ask legitimate questions, how this case was handled, how the men were treated, how the whole thing was prosecuted. They're all guilty. And somebody needs to go after them for it. And if it's a defamation suit, go.
And I was saying what I said earlier a little bit in jest. This actually has provided me with a lot of gifts, engaging with this experience. And I think that if we were to get any monetary money from the CBC for defamation, I have no doubt in my mind that the people who I have interacted with, including the people in this panel, would spend that money to help other people. Because this is clearly it couldn't be an isolated incident. Imagine how many other people are being prosecuted by the Crown who are innocent.
Probably tons
that we don't even know about, and there are tons.
Well, remember what Trish told us, Gord, when we were on Trish Wood's podcast together that time. When because she used to work for the Fifth Estate, but back when there was integrity in it, and she was telling us about this seems so crazy to me of how they're acting and what they've done here. Because when I worked there, we actually went in behind cases where people were wrongfully convicted, did the journalism, found the evidence, and got those convictions overturned. That's what we were doing. We were fighting for the man against the man. You know what I mean? This is
and it's
how
not like those.
be.
It's not like those wrongful convictions. Those other ones have just stopped. They're still happening.
Well, there used to be a design.
A Fifth Estate. There used to be a Fifth Estate.
Yes, there used to be a Fifth Estate. It actually existed, and again, let's not forget that had there not been any political attachment to this, who knows what would have happened? Because the propagandists can only act a certain way when we're talking about a political narrative, because their hands are tied on that. They are.
But technology again has interjected here. We are the Fifth Estate now.
Yes, exactly. And thank goodness for that there is ways to get the story out into the ethers. But again, we're heavily throttled. We have nowheres near the reach that they do. They have impacted more Canadians with their propaganda horseshit than we will ever be able to get to, unfortunately. That's just the truth. I mean, I accept that. It's fine.
Can I just say how proud I am that we didn't fall for the kook bait? None of us totally lost our mind over this.
No, we know what it is. I mean, again, it's not that hard. Once you understand what the mandate is of these people, and that listen, the establishment has run a monopoly on power in this country since 1867, okay, for sure. And they are not interested in sharing at all, okay? that means that they are pulling every string possible in order to ensure that the populace doesn't get the idea that they do have power. And that is their main agenda. Nothing else matters to them. Nothing, because they need to hang on to full control. So expect to be played with in every imaginable way when you disagree and your friends disagree and you decide that you want to start talking about it on a large scale. Expect to get abused. It's just, I mean, once you expect to take it personally anymore, you just realize it's part of the game. Like,
you can take abuse and also have pride at the same time. Take some pride in knowing that the people who made this documentary, we are their worst nightmare.
They are lesser than us. They're propagandists. They're regime stenographers. They take a big load of government spooge into their throats. And like Bill Hicks said, that the semen of Satan is burning a hole in their stomach lining, and they have to live with that, and we do not.
I sleep just fine at night, FYI.
That's right.
Well, and they wouldn't if they actually looked at the trial. So this is the thing, the access to information request. We have two options here. Either they admit that they didn't have the information to make this documentary responsibly and fairly and accurately, or they give it to us. And then we win. This is a precious gift. They have checkmated themselves. This is a win.
Right.
And then we got to find a way, I guess, after the fact to project that out, though, right? Because again, that's always our challenge, is in getting what we know. I mean, we know this is true. Well, we can verify it through that, but then we need to get that projected out into the populace.
My writing on this subject has received, I think, 250,000 views. The CBC has never gotten anywhere close on this subject. So things are trending in a positive direction, and I'm very optimistic. I know.
Well, and I'm glad to hear. Like our philosophy thus far has been to not project that stupid, whatever. I wouldn't even just jam together journalistic garbage. Why give it relevance by elevating it? Do you know how much?
Exactly. Well, that's why I skipped over the dialogue part. Was that a principle? Damn it.
This is why it's not posted on the political prisoners page. Like that's not Granny doing that. I instructed that. I was like, why are we going to bring attention to something that disparages us? Let it die in the void of the internet. Where nobody's looking for CBC's content. If it wasn't for our tax money, they would not exist because they don't have ratings. Nobody cares what they have to say. So to bring attention to it, to me, doesn't make a ton of sense. Just like I see people do on the internet with the people that they hate. Every time you post their stupid garbage, you're projecting and elevating and amplifying their message, which gives it more algorithm. You're an idiot. Period.
Well, and this is not a story that has captured the public imagination very widely. I mean, like the Coutts documentary has 70,000 views versus every other Fifth Estate documentary, which has well over 100,000. People just don't like this story. They're not interested in it. I'm starting to hate it myself. No, I'm just...
Well, probably the reason is because if people really started scratching and understanding what went on here, it would undermine the authorization of the Emergencies Act declaration. It would show where the foreign interference is coming from. They don't want us looking at this story.
No,
they really don't.
And that's why they didn't report on it during the pre-trial or the trial, right? Because then they would had to have given current, up-to-date information off of what was going on in that courtroom. That was not to their benefit. So they were not interested, right? That's why they didn't do that. They wanted people to be uninterested in our story, actually. That was actually what was being sold. Nothing to see here. We told you the original story. We'll handle it from here. Don't worry about it, right?
They didn't prepare for the Zoltans and Gords of the world.
Or the grannies. I mean, Granny garnered us over 12,000 eyes on Facebook. Like we are alive and well on Facebook and have been since pretty much day one because of Granny. And I mean, it's grannies.
Yeah, God bless her.
And the people, those 12,000 people, almost every one of them, I can say has either written a letter to the boys, donated $5 or 20 or thousands, came to our fundraisers, advertised our fundraisers, like sent letters and cards, reached out to us in individually as well. Like, those people are the people that got us through this. That's the reality.
The first time I ever heard you, Jacqueline, like ever in real life, was when Jerry and Isaac were released, and somebody had asked about fundraising. How can we help the other people? And you were like, I don't want any money. Like, nobody has ever really asked for money. This is such an absurd thing.
Right.
The fact that people have done it on their own accord, but there hasn't really been like a huge donation drive. Like,
no, and we were able to get through it mostly on. Thank God we had the help. That extra little bit of help that did come in took the pressure off for me, anyways, and in our situation. I mean, it was just thankful that that Jerry had me, honestly, and that I was able to continue to work, and I have a really great job. That was the only thing that saved us. If that had not happened, I don't think that any of this would have gone the same way. Like, if they would have been able to successfully run them over with not being able to pay a lawyer at all, it would have been over. We wouldn't have had this positive outcome. We would not be where we are right now. That was their main goal, was the lawfare is the bankruptcy. Most people can't afford the lawyer, most people. And like, we couldn't afford it. I just was able to cancel everything else out except for that, and focus all of my income directly on Jerry's lawyer. Every paycheck I got went to him.
I guess what I'm trying to say here is I really respect your gratitude for all the people who helped you, but being as close to the story as I was, I can honestly say with complete genuineness, not one person ever asked me for $1.
God, no.
It was never.
Do you have any idea how much pride swallowing that we had to, like, for myself in particular?
Yeah,
like, I'm a very strong independent woman, in case you didn't notice, and I don't ask people for help. I get her done myself. I don't, so to have to humbly accept.
There weren't a lot of panhandlers in Calgary, I'll tell you that much.
Listen, it was hard. It's still hard. Like, I don't fancy everybody. Listen, I can tell you.
No, nobody ever asked me for $1. That's the thing.
Nor would we. And most people are in this country are in the same boat. Nobody really has the extra $20 to donate because they got to pay the carbon tax to keep the fucking heat on now that it's -20. You know what I mean?
Like, a carbon tax election.
But that's the point. Like, it really hurt for me. It hurt me to know. I'm more than grateful, but it also hurt me to know that there's people out there that were giving us their last $20. They were. I know this. I know we had a lot of senior population that supported us, and they are not well off in this country. I'm sorry, but the boomers are not doing great. Okay.
Well, and they were so sweet.
And they were. People gave us literally their last $20 sometime, and that was amazing. Like, we appreciated it, and it hurt us at the same time. Like, I'd like to be able to give all of that money back if I can someday. Figure it all out.
Maybe we will. Back. Maybe we'll get it back from the CBC.
Right.
Let's do them for like $1 trillion or something ridiculous.
All right. Rich people donate only. Yes. I still have my fundraiser, my Give, Send, Go open to help settle the legal bills and perhaps any future defamation suits or anything to do with the envelope. We shall see. But yeah, guys, you gave me 4 hours. You gave my listeners 4 hours. Anybody who's paying attention to this, I really appreciate it. Lots of good perspectives here. Buck, I might have to get you back on just to like go deeper into all the threads you've been posting, sir.
You should definitely do
would love to.
Yeah, you've been doing some like legit hardcore journalistic work going through all these documents. And again, our regular media, no curiosity and no willingness to like hold the government to account, lest they get cut off from their subsidies or no longer invited to the pedophile cocktail parties thrown by the Laurentian elite who really run Canada.
Mm. But I would argue too that the stuff that Buck is doing, people do, like, even the people who fancy themselves to be, this is the word everybody uses, so I'll use it, awake, still have no idea to the lengths that our own government and allied governments will go to disparage us and keep us down. And and Buck's work that he's done gives a really nice insight into the absolute gong show of what it is that they do to us and how very tactical they are about it. And I think people need still, because I see Buck's stuff being like, Buck, you shared on Twitter, people still don't grasp it. It's another level that they aren't ready to accept yet, quite honestly, even in our own community of awake people. And it's something I think still needs to be force-fed a lot. It's education, and it's shit that people need to wrap their head around. So I fully second a Buck Voice of Gord podcast where more of this is laid down.
Oh, well, that's very kind. I mean, the truth is, you can only take one red pill a day, all right? So don't overdo it.
True. Yeah, the whole bottle does get choky.
Right. All right, everybody. Thanksgiving coming up this week here in the United States, and then Christmas in another month. I'm going to leave Tony and Chris's addresses at Drumheller in the show notes. Please write them a letter for Christmas, if nothing else. Cost of a stamp to cheer the boys up because they're still in there and they're probably not getting out until next year sometime. Say Merry Christmas, say Happy New Year. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. If you are a person of means that wants to donate to the legal funds, links to that will be in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening. We've chewed on your ears a good long time here. And thank you, Alex and Jacqueline and Buck, for joining me.
Thanks, Gord.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, way of the road.